which they pay.
I also want to say, by the way, I just remembered this. I was looking through this. I'll get back to that question. But when it comes to this, when a campaign gets so much money, let's say the Senate or the House, right? And they get so much money through one super PAC, and then everyone else or like this other candidate pledged that no, I'm not going to do super PACs. But then again, Senate or mayoral or representative seats. We're not talking about the presidency because that's a different. That's seen in a different light by the American people. They're not as focused as the presidential race. If someone, right, is then let's say he has nowhere near as much money and they're not as the other candidate, right? All right, I know that you're trying to laugh, but come on, man. But
no one is trying to laugh.
No, it's my dog. It was my dog. Sorry. Ow.
Oh, I wasn't sure.
Ruff, ruff.
But no, pretty much it's like, is there a problem then if no one can really raise anywhere near as much money as the guy who has a super PAC? Because at that point, yeah, they are kind of silenced. Yeah, because they don't have a super PAC, they're pledged not to do a super PAC because yeah, it's corrupt. Is that not wrong? And that person says, "Oh, I'm for the people," but the guy's taking a super PAC, the other guy's not. Is there not a problem with that?
Who are you directing this question to?
I'm just saying this is a general question for anyone to answer. Is that a problem that all these other people say, I'm not going to take super PAC money, but that one guy does, and he has so much revenue, he doesn't have to do the debates or anything, and that other guy, he's being completely overshadowed to the point where people don't even know he exists. Because that, in a sense, it is silencing. That is silencing, because you don't really know.
So I think you need to think about if you want to make an argument of getting money out of politics, you have to differentiate whether or not you're for getting money out of elections or getting money out of making decisions in Congress or in other parts of government. If you want to make the argument that money shouldn't be involved in making legislative decisions, that's one thing. But money is not the only factor in deciding who gets elected to what positions. What decides things is how much money is getting funneled into people who are making decisions once they are elected. So I don't think it is inherently a problem of super PACs donating to political campaigns, because we've already seen that candidates have made less money yet still have been elected at the national and local levels. Money doesn't decide elections. Money decides policies.
I mean, it does. To be fair, though, it does help a lot. Like it definitely helps.
Yes,
a lot.
obviously,
it does
yes.
help a lot.
There's no doubt about that.
I'll tell you one thing, by the way. Bloomberg gave $11.2 million to the incumbent. I think it was 2016 or 2018. I think it was 2016.
Like it definitely
yes, obviously,
of the
no
Senate
doubt.
for the Pennsylvania Senate seat. And he gave $11.2 million to the Republican candidate, and they won by 1 or 2 points. I'm pretty sure he won that because of all that money that Bloomberg gave to him.
Okay,
pretty
but that's
positive.
one individual case.
I mean,
we
you could also look at like
other cases.
I mean, you could also look at like the Hillary debate, where like Hillary received a lot more money than Donald Trump did, and Donald Trump still won.
And Bernie Sanders.
Yeah,
But
well, like
let's look at
Bernie Sanders got a lot of
Bernie
money
Sanders
but didn't
because
win.
he didn't take super PACs. Bernie Sanders did not take.
Yeah, I
super
mean
PACs.
his whole thing is like for the collective, so yeah, I mean that kind of makes sense why he would do
Yeah,
that.
that's
but
my point. Don't you
I just
think
don't.
that? Oh, sorry.
I mean, it's just a different strategy. Like I did read a whole book on like what exactly his strategy was, which I mean, it was like very, very few people that managed to like get out like pamphlets and stuff for other people to hand out, and it was just like an inspired revolution in that instance. But interestingly enough, though, when it was like time for like the millennials to go out and vote in the primaries, the millennials did not vote in the primaries. In fact, millennials are they're usually at fault for this, where they basically will talk all this game, and then when it goes to time to vote, they don't vote. They just pretty much just stay at home. And I don't know what it is that they do, but I vote every time. But just because what I do is, you know, but I'm getting off topic. But I guess the problem that I have is, if you have money, you have a right to do with that money as you see fit. But you see that if you have money, you don't have a right to do it as you see fit. So like I don't even look at this as like a problem like rights regarding money, but more as like a problem regarding rights of a human body. Like, does a person own their own body? Do they labor? Do they not obtain this money and then be able to spend it however they like? Like, you're arguing with that, and I find that very difficult to argue against.
Well, that's because again, that's really the problem here is like, is money in politics okay? I just so happen to say no. I don't really. I mean, again, I think this is a pretty.
You can make
position.
that. You can probably make that argument, and you're right. Like in the sense that,
yeah,
I mean, a lot of people say that.
It's wrong,
a lot of people, yeah, and a lot of people think it's wrong, which it most likely is. I think you could come up with a good, a good argument that it is wrong. But then, what is the alternative? The alternative is to basically force it so nobody can like donate their money no matter how much. So, what do you honestly? What world do you think is going to happen?
You just limit the amount of money.
But just because you limit the amount of money does not mean that there will not be demand to donate more money than a certain amount.
So you're telling me, so you're telling me that there's a big difference. There's nowhere near a difference.
No, because I think what you're creating is a black market. That's all you're going to create. You're not going to fix anything. In fact, you'll make things worse.
But that would be punished if they found out about it. That's the thing. And also, you're telling me that there's no difference between $1 million and $1,000.
I mean, of course there's a difference between that, but the question is whether or not that someone like this is like goes into the same. Well, this goes into the same exact arguments of like oh, does like a multimillionaire who dies have a right to give their money to like their sons or whatever? Like
is that gonna root?
I feel like sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. My question is this: is it gonna root out all of the corruption? No. Is it gonna rule out a good amount, a good chunk? Yeah. And that's what the whole point is. Nothing's perfect, obviously.
I mean, I don't. I not only do I think that it would not root out a good amount, but I think you would create this nightmarish, a nightmarish black market, which would be like that, which would basically be allowed by violence. Like you would see more shootings over
when
this.
When you ban things, they don't end. Okay, people find ways to circumvent regulations.
The only way to inherently
you're talking. Sorry. So what you're talking about is things like alcohol, marijuana.
But it's the same. It doesn't matter what. It doesn't matter what. It doesn't matter if it's alcohol, if it's drugs, if it's people, if it's slavery, if it's apartheid. If there's any time you have something that circumvents the market, then what you're going to end up with is people resisting it.
I know how to answer this. So pretty much the difference is that you're talking about something that where not just the rich people, but middle class and lower class people go into that when it comes to the black market. How many middle class and lower class people are going to be involved in a quote unquote black market when it comes to this? Only the rich and powerful, if they even want to risk that. So that's not even an equivalent thing to do.
Like you saw the case with like Epstein, right?
Okay, what about it?
Yeah, I mean, you know that
Which one? The one where he only got 10 months in prison, or the other one?
Huh? No, the one where he had like a child sex ring, and just because you make something illegal doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to disappear. Now, I mean, I guess you could come up with an argument that yeah, you should make it illegal, but like I guess what I'm saying is you're just gonna make that black market. In the instance of like when it comes to like children, right? That's like of course it needs to have like illegality in this situation because you can quantify that it's actually far, far, far worse to not make this illegal. But I think in this situation, when you're talking about the politicians receiving money, I think it's actually worse if we ban it as opposed to keep it. Like I think of it as like, okay, societally, will this make society better? And I would say no, it would not make society better.
So you're telling me that it's okay. So you're telling me because of, and you kind of.
I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm not saying it's right or wrong because that's not the way that that's. Okay, go ahead.
I was talking about what you were saying just now when it came to the whole child thing. I said so you kind of not teetered, but I wasn't sure what you were trying to say there. You're saying yeah, the people still do it, but we should obviously make it illegal. But at the same time, there's still going to be a black market on it.
Yeah.
So what's the solution? Do we make it illegal or not? Because apparently with kids, you agree with that. But when it comes to other things like drugs and others, it's not. You know why?
Yeah.
Because you're acknowledging like how I am. But the difference is that I'm acknowledging it as well when it comes to money in politics. There's a difference.
raping children versus
hold on.
giving money to politicians.
That's
Okay.
my
can go to
point.
different
There's a
situations.
difference. But there's a
Okay,
difference.
okay,
But I'm not talking
Mike-
about that when it comes to politics. I'm talking about that when it comes to drugs and stuff.
Yeah, so
Because
I see
that's drugs.
Yeah, I see
That's
exactly what you're saying. So like you can confirm that by making this product illegal, it results in a better society. Like, for example,
it's not really-
child sex
really a product.
trafficking. By making it illegal, it does result in a better society, regardless if there is a black market. When it came to prohibition, when it came to alcoholism, it turned out that it made society worse by prohibiting these products. So my question is society going to be worse or better by getting money out of politics?
When it comes to things like FEC versus Citizens United, like making sure that there's not unlimited amounts of money with super PACs, yeah, I would say that things makes better because it's not for the interest of the people. In the end of the day, that's really what it's not. It's for interest groups and it's for big lobbyists and it's big for corporations. How many super PACs do you see where it's just like, oh, for the people, by the people, and of the people?
Yeah.
Almost zero, like zero.
I mean, I guess like I think of it as like in the terms of like I think government has too much power, and the reason why these corporations go after the government is because they want to get special favors from the government.
Yeah.
My question is, why does the government have the power to give them that to begin with? Like, we had like a very, very, very clear separation of powers when the United States was first formed. You had, of course, many, like, it basically like locked everything down in a way where it's like if one person wanted to do something, there had to be another department that had to like approve of it completely. Otherwise, it just wouldn't happen. So like most things didn't happen for the course of like over 200 years. It was only until that we gave government more power that these things started happening. For 2/3 of the inception of the United States, the size of the government was about 4 to 5% GDP, and in times of war would go up to like 7 or 8% and then go right back down to 4 to 5%. And as of right now, though, the size of the government is roughly about 35-45%. That's of the entire United States GDP, which is completely crazy to me.
So if we went to answer, so go on. What happened?
Maybe it owns some stock in a company, in a publicly held company.
Most people don't own stocks.
What? Yeah, you can own stock. How old are you?
Champion. It is. I've been waiting.
What?
Oh, wait, what
How
was
old
the
are you,
question?
man?
Things are
You can own stock. Of course you can.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can own stock.
Anybody,
of course,
any fuckwad can own stock. Stock
yeah, but
is
most people
like
don't.
you can buy a stock for $20, okay? Instead of buying that cigarette pack or whatever, you can go buy a stock. You can.
there's an urgent task for you.
That is not
hold on, guys.
specific to rich and poor.
I was saying that the GDP, 35% of the GDP is held by the government is maybe because they have stocks in company.
Oh no,
Yeah, I was
they
gonna-
do it by taxes. They don't need to. They don't need to invest in a company. They get the money one way or another.
Well, no, the GDP is only the value added by the to their companies basically.
Yeah, it's like the total value of the United States, basically.
Added value.
Yeah.
The added value.
Yeah, but I mean, like, it's not a perfect
God damn it.
it's not a perfect like measurement on like quality of living or whatever, but it's pretty darn close, and you can use it to like interpret things like this that we're having right now. I guess like my issue that I have is like he breaks it down to like people don't have a right to like donate, but I don't think the problem
I
is
didn't
like whether
say
or not that
but
somebody
alright.
is.
Okay, apparently that's what I said.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant like that when people give money to the government, like a huge amount of money, it's not okay. If it's a smaller amount, then it's not so bad.
Would you argue that America on the federal is slowly becoming an oligarchy, or is to some
It's already
extent
an
at the moment?
oligarchy at this point. I mean, it's already kind of an oligarchy. I mean, look at it. They changed the rules for Bloomberg.
They didn't change the rules for Bloomberg, actually.
Yes, they did. Yes,
No,
they
didn't.
did.
The Nevada,
Yes, they did.
they changed the Nevada rules not because of
Oh my
Bloomberg. They
God.
changed
So
the
you're
individual
telling me-
donor threshold.
So you're telling me that's a coincidence that Bloomberg just so happened to come in and they say, you know what? Let's get rid of the rule when it came to the individual
It's
threshold.
because,
no, you know
because
why they did that,
Bloomberg
right?
is a self-funded dude, and he's
So
also
that- so
high in
that's
the
okay then.
polls.
But the reason why
yes,
they-
it's okay.
That's
Yeah.
no, that's an oligarchy. That's literally
Dude,
that an
that's
oligarchy?
he's high in the polls
So
and
it's
he's
an
funding his
oligarchy
own
if
campaign.
one candidate
Plutocracy.
over the
Are you
other.
saying that's
Why
not
would that
plutocracy? Are you okay
He's
with
funding.
plutocracy?
He's literally funding his own
It's
campaign,
so
and
you're telling me that the-
he has
And,
he has
like as long as it
he
has
has the
to do
poll
with
threshold.
politics, it's not
what
okay.
he needs is the donor threshold. He can't make that ever
Oh, you know why, right? It's
because
there's
he's
no
self-funding.
No, it's because you need the reason why they had that rule is because they want you to have a grassroots movement to show that you have support. If you don't, well then there's a problem.
And the polls don't show that.
The reason why
That
he
you
has
have support.
the reason
Okay.
why he's so high in the polls is because he bought his way.
Hold on, quick question. So here, I guess like
So
I just.
you're okay with that stuff.
Well,
That's fine.
I just thought of something real
Apparently-
quick. So like, let's say if like let's say like Dr. Robotnik is real, right? Like he's super hated and he's got a lot of money, right? So like Dr. Robotnik comes out and he makes like he gets into the polls because he donated like billions of dollars into his fund so he can get get on the ballot. So do you honestly believe that this person will get elected based on their reputation?
Well, again, the Dr. Robotnik, come on now.
Yeah, I threw
Seriously?
Dr. Robotnik in there because
Hey,
he's like an
like
evil
Dr.
guy.
Eggman, like, come on, this guy that blew up half the moon. Are you kidding
Bruh.
me?
Yeah, no,
No.
but that's what I'm saying. Like it's a
No,
bad guy.
but-
Like
well,
people
again,
don't like
well-
Dr. Robotnik, so no one's gonna
Well, that's-
vote for Dr. Robotnik just because he has a lot
But
of
the-
money. Doesn't mean that it influences people. All he did was waste a fuck ton of money.
Well, the thing is that
Betsy DeVos donated a lot of money. You see where it got her.
Secretary of Education, but what's it
Yeah.
called? Yeah, it's my point. It's a plutocracy. You're saying that it is okay for people to buy their. We're not in a meritocracy because that was the case. We wouldn't have people like Bloomberg up there. All right, just know that. We wouldn't be in a meritocracy if Bloomberg was up there.
Bloomberg
so that's the
sucks,
thing.
man.
It's
I
a,
hate
it's
Bloomberg.
a plutocracy.
I really
So,
hate Bloomberg.
wait. By the way, I want to say this. He did buy his way in because he literally donated.
Yeah, he
to
did.
almost he donated to almost.
But what's
every
wrong with
state
that?
Democratic-
Don't you think a person has a right to do with their money as they see fit?
Not
Yeah,
when it's
exactly.
corrupting. Not when it's corruption. You're telling me that it's okay.
What? But how is it
That is
corruption?
You're buying everyone.
No,
You're
I think
literally
it's
buying- you
corruption
are
to
buying the
like
election.
tell people how to do what it is with their money as they see fit.
But
Like
the
basically
problem
having a
is that
government
it's
that says
unlimited amounts of
no,
money.
you can't
It's
spend that
unlimited
because
amounts
it's
of money. You're telling me-
wrong.
You're telling me
Because you're
the
gonna
seven-
affect other
basically-
people's lives.
You're
Bloomberg
telling
does
me the
not
ninth. You're
have-
telling me that the ninth richest person, it's okay for him to have a bigger voice than other people, than like someone like Tulsi Gabbard. Even though I don't like her that much, I kind of. But you're telling me that it's okay for someone like him to go up there
To preserve the rights of individuals,
The only reason why
yes.
he went up there is because of him buying his way to the polls.
Yeah,
You're
to
telling me you're-
preserve the rights of
Okay, so-
individuals, the answer is yes to your question.
That's plutocracy, man. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's
That's
not a
plutocracy.
matter of plutocracy. It's about
It
I
is
want
plutocracy.
a
That's the definition of it. You're
no,
buying your way
I
into it.
want a minimal government, right? And to do so, you basically have to give the government less power. And the only way that you give government less power is you stop instating rules that you think is going to make society better, that basically gives government, a corrupt government, power to go over people. So you are
Well,
basically giving people, a government, power to attack people based on whether or not that they donate to a political figure.
Well,
Like,
if
do you
it's
not
the
understand
government-
how that
well,
could become
well,
corrupt?
No. You know what? It would be the same thing. Just there wouldn't be a puppet behind it. It's the
No, but they're,
corporations
like,
that- wait,
okay,
Wait, wait. Can I just say? It's the corporations that are they're the puppet master behind the government. All right.
Okay.
You get rid of the puppet, you still have the puppet master, which is the corporations.
Okay.
Don't you see? There's still a big problem.
Okay. Let me. I'll try to approach this a different way. Let's try this. So let's say that we do your magical world that it's illegal to
My
donate
magic, I'm not
after.
gonna listen if you're just gonna be like.
I'm
that.
sorry.
Come
I'm
on.
sorry. No. I don't mean to be disrespectful. So like, let's say that we get your rule into place, right? Where like people can't donate like an exorbitant amount of money. Let's just say like, I don't know, $50,000. You're not allowed to donate any more than $50,000 to like a single campaign, right? And government does this, right? So they instill this rule, and then we get Bernie elected, okay? Bernie now is elected for 4 years or 8 years, okay? Now, after Bernie has been elected, let's say we've got Hitler McFuckerstash comes in, right? He's super freaking corrupt, right? He's really, really corrupt. But guess what? You just gave power to that guy, okay? You gave power to Trump 2.0, okay? By giving power to government, you basically allow corruption to happen. That's why Donald Trump is hated so much. That's why you have so much shit wrong with the government, because people very quickly are willing to take over other people's lives just so they can have their ideology pushed.
Okay, so when it comes to that, my question is, would that fucker stash, whatever his name was?
Yeah, Hitler McFuckerstash.
Yeah,
super ultra corrupt
my question
politician.
Was he corrupt?
Let's say he was
wait,
super.
Wait. Was he a corrupt politician before the implementation of that, or after?
I'm just gonna go off on a limb and say no, he was not a corrupt politician. It was only until that he got into power where he went completely crazy.
You don't think he would get voted out under that type of thing because people would kind of know, because he wouldn't be bought out by super PACs?
Yeah, like Donald Trump.
Yeah, but that's the thing. When it comes to, he did have super PACs, is the difference.
Okay, it doesn't matter where the money comes from. The point is, you basically gave the government power to attack people who donate a certain amount of money. Like, it's not okay. So you gave them that permanent power, and it can't. But that's what you just did.
Well, in the same time, in the same argument, if the government has the power to say, well, you know what, let's give more power to the corporations. Who are they giving power to? To the corporations? Or to the
well,
people?
if you give government, if you give power to the government, right, then that gives power to corporations. That would give power to corporations.
You're giving power to the people with the government is the thing. I think you're missing that. I mean,
Wait, say that again.
So I think you're giving power to the people through the government. You're saying that the Civil Rights Act, for example, you're saying, well, you made the government too powerful now. Now I can't, you know.
Well, hold on, no. The difference between the Civil Rights Act and what you're saying is one of them enhances someone's liberty, but what you're saying decreases someone's liberty.
You're making it a more even playing field for people who are the rich and powerful.
I mean,
you're saying
I guess I just don't believe. But don't you think that is reducing your individual rights? Don't you think that that's the case?
How much disposable income do typical Americans have? Not that much. How much disposable income do people like Bloomberg have? Apparently a lot. All right. Just because he's doing bad in the polls now. The reason why is because he did horrible in the debates. But in the same time, though,
so he can waste his money.
Pretty much to third place nationally.
Yeah, he can waste his money, and that's okay.
You don't see a problem.
But Bloomberg isn't going to win.
But the thing is that the problem is that he potentially could have. That's the thing. Don't you think there's a problem with that?
No, I don't.
That he could
no,
have?
because at the end of the day, regardless if he got himself into third place by his own money, the alternative is you basically have a government where if you have a guy who super sucks now has the power to give corporations additional powers and favors by giving the government that power to begin with. So if you give government power to deny donation, then you give government power to be able to give writs to corporation. So why give them the power to begin with? Remove it.
No. So wait, what's it called? So again, it's just, I think at this point it's just an argument of, I guess, of just principle, because you're more scared of the government. But I'm seeing the government.
Yeah, because I've seen the government. You can see the government do bad things. They do it all the time.
But who bought out the government?
Huh?
Who bought out the government?
Corporation, because government got the power, and then corporation takes advantage of that because that's what capitalists do.
But also, by the way, those regulations you're talking about, they weren't real, actual good. There's such thing as good regulation and bad regulation. Those were bad regulations. You know why? Because they helped the corporation. That's the difference. When you help corporations,
Yeah.
those are bad regulations.
So if you
There's
give
different
government
types of
power, do you
regulations.
honestly think that the corporation is
But
not
that's
going
such
to
a
chase
simplistic
after
way
that?
of looking at it.
It's
That's
not a
such
simplistic way.
It's
I'm saying,
extremely. You know why? Because at that point, you would have had the Articles of Confederation, not the Constitution, because you said, well, you're giving the government too much power. That's pretty much what the people were saying against the Articles of Confederation.
Okay,
But
you
look what
can
the
come-
problem was. They couldn't get anything done.
yes, exactly. That's the point.
So that's okay.
Yes.
Oh my gosh! See, that's
Yes,
just a
that's much
philosophical
better.
disagreement.
Well, I like
oh,
it.
so
I
you-
like
so
it
you're
much
telling me
better
America
when
would
the
have became. So answer me this: you think America would have become a superpower, or at least able to defend itself, if it was still the Articles of Confederation? The problem with the Articles of Confederation was that they didn't have a military. All the states' monies were pretty much worthless, and they couldn't control anything. Anything.
well,
So you're telling me they would have been able to survive under
Well,
that
They
type
wouldn't
of
have.
guide?
They wouldn't have.
well,
Exactly.
I mean, like,
That's my
there's,
argument. They wouldn't
He's.
have. You
No one
need
else
some
is
sort of
advocating for
government.
that but him.
But you
Huh?
need some sort of government.
yeah, you do.
That's the
Yeah,
whole
like there's
point.
certain
But you're
there's
saying
certain
that it was
levels of
okay.
government
But
where
you
it
said
makes
it was
sense,
okay with the
where it
Articles of
enhances
Confederation.
people's like bodily autonomy. So like
But
in
the-
an instance where like you're talking about like a military, right? If we basically did not have a military, then you would end up with people's bodily autonomy being revoked all the time. So what do? Well, okay, you have a little bit of military. Okay, that makes sense. But like, let's say, under FDR, you have like the Social Security, which was then released, and like before it wasn't necessarily a problem, but then was implemented because people liked the idea. Now we have like this horribly corrupt system that like is bankrupt itself, right? Like,
So-
but do you understand like how
So you're saying
like
there wasn't a
when you
problem
give
before
government?
Social Security?
Hmm?
You're saying there was no problem before Social Security?
So generally speaking, what happened back then was that it came down to like private, just private donation and people trying to save their own money. It wasn't up to government to tell people how to save their money. So yes, you did have instances of people who were like having difficulties, right, and that they were like lame or whatever. But then oftentimes there was common like donations that would get placed that would help these people out. So like there was a lot more camaraderie back then. But
Okay, so I'll tell you this then. The reason, an example of why Social Security was so good was because when the Great Depression happened. By the way, before Social Security,
ooh, don't
the
go at
poverty-
me with the Great
No,
Depression. I
wait,
know a
wait,
lot
wait,
more about the
even
Great
before-
Depression
but-
than you,
but
based on that
before the Great-
statement.
But even before the Great Depression, you know that the elder poverty rate was like 50%, right? After Social Security, it's 10% now. You know that, right? Is that just the thing? That's a fact. All right, Social Security helped people. It's the whole problem. It's the whole thing. The problem now is because now they're saying it's corrupt, or it's bankrupt. You know why? Because they keep cutting taxes for the top 1%. You don't see a problem with that.
That's not
So-
why.
Come on,
what?
stop! Come on,
Because-
the guy who's saying "Oh God" or stuff.
A Social Security tax has
Security's
nothing to do
bankrupting
with
this
that.
country because more and more people are becoming eligible to it because the life expectancy is raising.
Exactly.
Wait,
That's
wait,
why.
I want to
that's-
hear what he's saying. Challenge
Yeah.
the idea.
I used to-
Okay,
I-
Social Security is bankrupting this country because there's been no change to the eligibility of how old you need to be in order to obtain it. The life expectancy in this country has raised significantly since Social Security has been
But
implemented.
Oh,
It's not because the top 1% are getting not taxed as
Yeah,
high. Social Security and
exactly.
Medicare
Oh, see,
are
that's where we
bankrupting this
disagree.
country.
See, that's the problem. No, that's
In
false,
fact,
because
you can
know
you
what?
can
No,
actually
basically,
in fact you
that
can
is-
actually make an argument about how it's effectively a tax on the poor to give to the rich, because when you look at the demographics of people who are like 70 plus years old, they basically have a much higher net worth than that of somebody who's like 25 or 30 years old. It's like demonstrably
you know why,
different.
right? Because when they were kids, by the way, during
They
the
saved
50s
their
and
money.
the 60s.
Don't
wait,
talk to him
wait,
like
no,
he's a
no, no, no,
retard
no.
and then ask us not to laugh at you.
What's wrong? Wait, what? Excuse me?
Hannah's
No. Wait, excuse me. What'd you say?
You were talking in a way of acting like he was stupid.
I didn't say that. I wasn't acting like if he was stupid. What the hell? Me? He was. I mean, he's the guy who's saying, the fantasy world stuff. I never said that, so don't even start with that.
But I didn't
okay?
say anything that
but,
was
no,
fantasy.
But I know
I'm
you
giving
took
like,
it back then. It's fine.
what
But
happened.
I'm not talking to him like a retard, so I don't know what you're talking about. All right? So when it comes to that, it is because of the things like the top 1%. You're telling me that because people... Well, see, there's so much to go off there because you're telling me that the tax cuts that Trump did, right?
I love
80% of it
every
went to the
person.
top 1%.
I am
Yeah.
You're telling me that is okay.
No.
No.
Okay, but
But
then
it's
you're
but I
you're
wasn't
talking
wasn't
about-
trying to
but
make that
also, by
argument.
the way,
I
to
said
answer that
Social Security is
I
bankrupting
want-
this
but the
country
reason why
because
it
of the
became
life
bankrupt-
expectancy
The
rate.
reason why it became bankrupt now is because of those taxes. Because back then, when baby boomers were my age, for example, or millennials' ages, they owned more net worth. Why? Because the system back then favored them more. And also, by the way, taxes on the rich were much higher back. They were. They actually were.
Yeah, they'd never paid those taxes.
You're
Like
saying
when
that
you
they never
start to
paid
when you start to reach like the 70%, 60% mark, basically they find out that people don't necessarily pay those taxes. What they end up doing is that they usually use a ton of loopholes to be able to get around the system. So like people, like when you're talking about like in the 1950s and 1960s where there were effectively like 90% tax policies and 70% tax policies, those nobody paid that. Not a single person paid that. In fact, when they looked at like the revenue,
about that.
no, and I'm saying when they looked at the revenue, like when they increased it from like 40% to like 60 70%, and then upwards into 90%, they found that their revenue decreased, not increased. Which
so why was it? So why did they own so much more wealth? Or why were things? Why was it more stable at least?
Because
what
the
was
government
reasoning?
had less power.
No, that's just a disagreement right there. That's no. That's
I mean,
just,
that's what happens.
No,
the government was much smaller then than it is now.
Nah, you could say well.
And I can quantify many different societies where they've basically made the government bigger, and then shortly after comes societal collapse.
But you're telling me that it's okay. You're telling me that it's okay that people are living paycheck to paycheck. You're saying that people are living paycheck to paycheck just because of their fiscal responsibility.
People didn't live paycheck to paycheck in the 1890s.
That's the 1890s. Well,
Yeah.
I'm not even going to argue that because that's the 1890s first of all, and second
Well, that's
of all.
the reason why I picked out that specific date. The reason why I picked out that specific date was because the size of the government was roughly about 45%, and then you also had robber barons, where it was just rampant capitalism, where you would assume that things would be horrific, yet the reality was it wasn't. People were doing really, really well back then. It was only until I think it was 1927 where it started in 1914 where the Federal Reserve was then created, and then they created a gold standard to like the dollar, which then in effect, because like they couldn't like pay out the amount of gold to dollars, they were basically printing out more dollars than there was gold, and then people were investing in these pieces of paper for gold, and then when they came where they wanted to like get it back, especially like foreign nations, the end result was an economic collapse. So like, and then people like point to things like the robber barons as being like the people who caused this, when in reality it was actually government that intruded into other people's lives that created the problem to begin with.
Well, no, I mean, in the same time, well, I mean, you could talk about that. But right now, for example, which, let's be honest, this affected him more now, the Great Recession, the people in charge of, what was it, the Federal Reserve. The man in charge of it then, after when the Great Recession happened, he had more of a, what you like saying, like a libertarian type of philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Towards the end of the Great Recession, after, he said he was wrong. Because he was.
Wait, who?
I forgot what his name was, but he was in charge of the Federal Reserve, I think, from the 80s and onward.
Okay.
Wait. Who laughed? Just I want to know.
I don't think anybody laughed.
No
I
one
heard
laughed.
No, I think someone did, but
I heard someone breathing like heavily into
yeah,
their mic.
probably from the left.
Yeah, I was
It
breathing.
didn't sound like a laughter though.
You're referring to me, I was breathing.
Oh, bro, what are you making those sounds?
Is
can't see who's
someone mousing me right now? Is someone mousing me? Am I being moused?
I can't.
Donald
See, the
Duck
thing is, I
hospitalized
can't.
after mixing meth with Viagra.
No, but
Back to
like,
theory.
I don't remember the guy's name, but it was during the after the Great Recession. He said he was pretty much wrong because he had a libertarian way of looking at how the thing. I mean, you're telling me like things like Glass-Steagall, right? Like they repealed that. Pretty much where it was like certain types of banks couldn't, collude or do any type of business with each other. They took that off during the Clinton years. Like,
I mean,
Yeah,
there
and,
there
you
are
know,
certain instances of market regulation where it does make sense, right? Like I'm not like an absolute 100% diehard anarcho-capitalist because I know like when you study economics, you realize that there are market failures and they're real and you have to do something about it. It's not something that just goes away. You have to regulate these things. So like there are instances of market failures that need to be met with certain levels of regulation so that way you can result into a better society. Take for example, we were talking about like people who couldn't work like physically or because of some sort of mental capacity or physical capacity that they just cannot work. This is an example of a market failure. This is not something that just gets fixed. You have to have some sort of donation process or like an incentive for like tax breaks for donating to this. There are many different ways that are like non-intrusive and it basically does not revoke people's autonomy and at the same time it helps people. So like I'm with you that there are certain levels of like government power that need to be given, but it should be entirely there for for the sake of people and to basically revoke people's autonomy by saying, oh, you can't donate this, you have to this is too much money, you have to donate to something else, that's okay. And like you understand that this gives government unruled merit or merit for like someone who's like super corrupt to come in and basically take advantage of these rules that were set in place by giving certain corporations more rulings than other corporations, which creates the very problem that you're talking about.
the argument is whether or not.
The thing is, like during a depression or recession, of course, the most libertarian of us can also agree that the government has to intervene, otherwise the whole system collapses.
Interestingly enough, the system, it did collapse because of a government because of government intervention. And then even further, when people like think about well, what did FDR do? The problem with FDR at the time was that he really didn't know what to do. He had a bunch of different advisors with a bunch of different ideas on what to do to fix the economy. And his idea was, okay, well, let me just grab like little pieces of everybody's ideas. And when he was sitting there meddling with the economy, the end result was that the economy, it dropped. I think it was like another 14.9% during his several years as president. He was further than 8 years, right? What was it, like 12?
12.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
was
he was
12,
12
yes.
years. But like, yeah, so like when he came out there and did that, you know, the entire economy decreased by another 14.9%, I think it was. And as of like when it came to the Great Depression, it had decreased by, I think it was 29%. So historically, people think of it as, oh, well, FDR, he fixed it. But I wouldn't say that he fixed it. In fact, I would argue to say that he prolonged it, that the market crash was going to happen one way or another, and that it could recover itself, but it was not going to be able to recover itself as fast as if he were to just do nothing with it.
Well, I would say that he did implement things like Social Security, where at least people had some sort of guarantee, security. But I can say that definitely during the '80s, when Reagan was president, the gap between the middle class and the top and the 1% definitely increased. It did.
Correct, because trickle down economics doesn't work, and it does not work, and nor would I say. See, here's the thing: trickle down economics is like, oh, let's give tax breaks to the rich. See, here's the thing: I'm not about giving tax breaks to the rich. I'm about giving tax breaks to everybody. I think everybody should keep their money.
I don't want to give everybody. No, I don't want to give it to the top 1% in general. They don't
Oh,
deserve the tax break.
I mean,
No.
like right now they have like a tax. They have a taxation of like 40%, and just because they get more money does not mean that it's gonna like the trickle down economics is gonna work. It's not.
By the way,
but
the 600 richest families, by the way, they don't make most of their money off of income. They make their money off of other ways. It's the people who are like the multimillionaires. I think it's the top 10%. Yeah, they make most of their money off of income, but not the 600 richest billion. Not the 600
of course not. They
richest
make
families.
money off of their businesses, off of their investments.
Yeah, their investments and their
Yeah,
businesses.
I mean,
But
there's
look,
nothing wrong with that,
and
right?
but they pay less taxes because of that.
Yeah.
You know that, right? That's
Yeah,
wrong.
exactly.
They
I
should
think
pay
that's
more
wrong.
taxes.
No. I think the
No.
people in the
Because
middle class should
government-
pay less taxes. I don't think you
Well,
should.
the-
I don't think you should give the government more power. Like anytime I say, "Oh, let's tax the rich more," I think, "Oh, okay, give government more power." I don't like that idea.
But you
I
give
want
more
less
you're giving
taxes.
people-
I
but
want
you're
the
giving
poor to
people-
get less taxes. I want
But
I
you're
want there
giving
to.
people you're giving people more power by making sure that
That's
they don't
great.
get. But no,
And isn't
no,
that
because
great?
you're making sure they don't get bank. Most people get bankrupt in the country because of medical debt. All right, that's just that's the thing. You have to know that. All right.
Yeah.
That's a
So
big thing.
what
Yeah,
you have
yeah,
to
so
look at the
who's
history.
who's
You have to look at
responsible
the
for
history.
that? Who's
Yeah,
responsible for that?
it was government that
It's
started
not because
that.
of government. That's
Yes.
just a silly thing. The government was bought out by the
Dude,
corporations. You're
before
leaving
the
out
government
other
got
part.
involved in the
You're
medical
leaving-
industry,
you are
the
leaving
doctors were
other
coming
part.
to your house, dude.
You're leaving
Regular
the
people
other
could
part.
afford it. So like
That
when
was
you're talking,
during but that's short term. We're talking about long term, and that's
what
where we are
short
now.
term? It was like that for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's only
No,
until
because you
government
didn't-
got
but that's
involved.
but look at the other situations though. But oh yeah, we're talking about an era where like people thought that cocaine was a good medicine. No, I'm not going to
Yeah.
take that seriously.
In fact,
No,
in some
exactly.
situations
And
it
by the way-
is.
Because it is, yeah.
It
No,
actually is in some
Jesus.
situations.
But not when it comes to a cold. Like,
Yes,
come on.
it is.
It actually
Well,
is.
It
Yeah.
actually
To a cold?
is.
How,
Yes.
Like what? Like, but in what way? Like,
Yes, it was
there's a
only until
specific-
like the
there's
stigma was
obviously a
made that it
specific way
was
of
seen
doing
as
it.
a bad
you just
thing.
don't, you don't just inject it in you. I'm sure there's
No,
obviously
no,
a
you don't.
specific way.
No.
Exactly,
I think-
that's the
yeah.
point. There's a
And the
specific way of
concentration
doing it.
wasn't as heavy because the concentration wasn't as heavy either because
That's my
the
point. There's a specific way
well
of doing
because
it.
like the
just
product
injecting
wasn't
it in
the
you.
product wasn't illegal, so like it wasn't like
And look-
like it wasn't like you had like little Timmy and you just like grabbed like a big ass freaking powder of cocaine and you just like,
I
oh,
know,
snort
like,
that,
they
Timmy.
still gave
Like
it
that's
to
not what happened.
But in different ways.
actually-
But also,
Like it was
I mean,
like a
the reason-
cocaine syrup that was like mildly powerful and it like
Yeah.
it did help their cold like it's true that these things are real.
But
It's opened
what's better
airway.
though? That or what we have now? The cocaine?
Well,
Is
I
that
think
really better?
Well, I think like you can make a cheap medical industry by making it so that government is not involved in the system because right now we have government that has active quotas for how many doctors can graduate. Did you know that?
What are you wait, what?
Did you
No,
know that
that's
there
it.
is a
That's bad
quota?
regulation then.
Yeah,
That's my
it's
point. That's
no,
bad
it's live.
regulation.
So
I
like
don't
like
those
any.
regulations.
Well, here's the thing. Anytime you give government merit to regulate things, then what you
So-
end up with is eventually one corrupt politician will take advantage of these things by accepting donation either
Right, but
secretly
the
or
caveat
not
to that
secretly
is-
and then
Oh,
create
recommend
these
it.
That comes back to
regulations
my
and
point.
call
Why-
it something fancy. So
But that's
no.
my-
Okay, so the problem that I have is you're not going to stop people from donating, but can you reduce the power of government? I say yes, you can.
Why
That's
would
the-
you want to? Why would
What?
you want to reduce the power of government? Yes, corruption is a phenomenon, but it's also a human condition. It
Correct.
always arises.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
But
for
the
sure,
whole
for sure.
point is the whole point is government is contracted by the people in order to regulate and to defer actions that cannot be taken efficiently on an individual basis. So what you do is you consistently will have struggle, conflict, but this is part of the human condition. So people need
Yeah.
to stop expecting utopia from humanity and realize, yes, you do need
Yeah.
regulation, and sometimes you need more regulation.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
sometimes we need
and
we
for
need to
when it
figure
comes
out
to
that
like
we don't need so much regulation.
yeah,
But-
well,
but-
it
but
comes to when it comes to market failures, I'm totally with you, man. I think that there is certain levels of like of government regulate. Like I'm not an ANCAP. Like there are certain instances
I
where
get
it's like
that
I think
part,
we
but-
need some level of government. But like I guess like the part that frustrates me a little bit is that like you had originally the idea of a government that had a clear separation of powers where
When
they
was
base.
this?
Hmm?
When? Which period of time?
I mean, it started
roughly,
from
you don't have to give an
inception,
exact date.
in roughly about inception up until about 19.
Are we talking about the United
14.
States?
Yeah, the United States.
Okay, well, you have a lot of factors here. America is not reflective on the inception that it was once framed for, right? We have a multicultural state and everything that has come from that. So you're not going to have a reflective society based on its inception. It has taken an evolutionary stage, for better or worse. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who romanticize what America was or necessarily
Okay,
even could
I
be.
am not one of those people because I've read many textbooks on the history of the United States, and I know how the history of the United States went down. Okay, if you really want to like know exactly how it happened, like a lot of people, they come and conflate something like, oh, the United States was pro-racism, the founding fathers were pro-racism, and they were pro-slavery. That is literally
I
not
wouldn't say
true.
racism or slavery. I would say that they were necessarily white nationalists.
No, no, you are
Yeah, they
so wrong. It's insane.
They
Here's
weren't
the
saying
thing.
in
Here's
300
the
years.
problem.
Hold on
Here's
a
the
second,
problem with what
President
you're saying. Every
But
single
it's
person,
necessarily
right,
true.
has had their own opinions. Okay, so there were certain people that had certain opinions, and then you had other people who had different opinions, like we do today. It's not like all of them got together and they just like started agreeing on absolutely everything. There were a lot of fundamentalists,
You're
like
not listening. You're not
super
listening
against slavery.
to the premise here. The premise was the nation was necessarily built for the Angloid mindset and the Christianity that essentially
No, you are wrong.
No,
You are
no,
the
wrong
Anglo. It
fundamentally.
is true.
No,
It is
you are wrong
necessarily true.
fundamentally.
Okay,
You are wrong.
these
I
people
I
who
don't know what to tell you,
culminated
dude. You're
America,
complete.
before you
Yeah,
keep
I
telling me
can
I'm
tell.
wrong,
Well, I can
let me
tell
defend
you
myself
haven't
to
done
give
enough
you-
reading on this because
I
I know you're wrong.
No, that's actually wrong because, for example, Smith, one of the founding fathers, is it?
Well, there was a lot of like you had a lot of founding
Yeah.
fathers that were
Yes, but Adam
fundamentally
Smith is
against
one of
this.
them,
In fact,
right?
there was a ton
Wait,
of debate
wait.
regarding
Wait.
the
I know.
the inalienable rights, where they got it from John Locke, where it was a right to life, liberty, and property. And there was a
Right.
really long debate. A lot of fighting about this, where specifically it was about the right to property, and mostly
but
the right to
wait.
property was a big issue, was because that there were black citizens that they did not consider to
They
be.
weren't citizens.
There were also
They weren't citizens.
Please understand that that it's different people discussing
They weren't
different
citizens,
ideas.
dude.
You had hardcore libertarian principle ideas where they were like, no, they absolutely are citizens, and then you had others that were like, no, they're not
No one
citizens.
never
We have to
citizens.
revoke
No
this
one
right
gave
to
them the
property.
right of
Let me
citizenry.
finish, please.
I don't
Let me
understand
finish.
why you're trying to retrospectively.
Hold on, I'm not retro. This
expound-
is not
expound-
retrospective. I'm giving you the actual history. So, okay, the problem is that they were discussing about the right to property and whether or not that these people were property, okay? And it was a very long and contentious debate. It came down to that this is so complicated that we can't actually fix this issue right now. We've got Reds that are choking down on our backs right now, and we need to be able to do something about it. So they left the table open and said, okay, forget it. We're not going to like go one way or another. Instead, we're going to put in the right to pursue happiness. And so they said, well, what about the right to property? And they said, well, of course you have a right to property. I mean, that's pretty obvious, right? Like just having, like when you have a piece of land or where you have like a ball or a tool or something, that you have a right to it. You own that piece of property. So they felt that it was redundant to put it in, so they just threw in the right to happiness. So that way, later on, you can have founding fathers or other people that were able to fight in terms of liberty. But do not mistake that the founding fathers were ultimately white nationalists. They were not. They were, in fact, pro-liberty as it was. You had some white nationalists, just as you have different politicians that have different ideas, but ultimately conceded to the rights of liberty. The entirety of the United States is based on that.
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, but now I want to just say, going back to the
Oh
point
man, I was
of
talking.
that America was based on English values and for English people. Like that's debunkable. For example, there's one of the founding fathers, John Adams, right? he proposed a style of constitution that is reminiscent of the Swiss constitution that was written prior.
The Constitution of the United States was based off of the Enlightenment period. John Locke, okay, his works.
Let me finish. So no, John Adams, he proposed. That doesn't mean that it passed. He proposed this style of Switzerland is a confederacy, so a confederal state, which is different from a federal state. And so basically saying that the United States was based for English people is absolutely wrong, because exactly this model of constitution was thought about for the conception of this new state, for this new country. So it's possible that it would be for English people only.
So at the again, I gave like a very long discussion on why it effectively was for everybody, and that was the original intent. In fact, you had a lot of hardcore libertarian type thinkers like Quakers. You had a bunch of I know for a fact that what was his name? Thomas Jefferson was pretty much, even though he himself owned slaves, by the way, I'm not holding into that, but that he was fundamentally against slaves in general. Like, he wanted no slaves. So like to say that like the founding fathers were all like these white racist nationalists, you had different ideas coming from different people all at once, and the debate was so strong they had to basically just shelve it for later because they had a war to deal with.
Yeah, I totally agree with you with the point that it's not white nationalist, and it's not like it was.
Yeah. I'm
The
sorry, there was somebody who debated that, and I'm like, you're just wrong. I don't know what to tell you.
Esteemed allies, I stand before my
he was muted by the server though.
Yeah. But anyway, like, so I mean, I guess we kind of got off track though. We were talking about how I think somebody was saying that we shouldn't have people being able to donate to a politician if it's too much money, like through super PACs and stuff. Like, he doesn't like that idea.
Well, there's nothing. I don't think that there's anything wrong with donating whatever money that you want, because it's like your money to do whatever you want with it. So like, yeah. As long as it's not the money of somebody else.
Is anybody else wanting to debate or no? Anything? Anybody? No? Yes?
The debate's about to start in like fucking 13 minutes.
Oh, there's another debate starting? Which one?
Well, this is actually a legitimate debate between Vaush and Stephan Molyneux.
Whoa, cool.
Yeah, it's on the basis of capitalism and human. Let me see what it was. It was something related to that. Yeah, capitalism, exploitation of the source of human wealth. Yeah.
Oh man.
That's gonna be good.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah. What do you think about that? Do you think capitalism is an exploitation on people?
It can be in some cases, but I mean, really, I'm not really 100% knowledgeable on the situation, but as it stands, I'm more so for a system where it's regulation, but it's not socialism.
I'm like a, I would call myself like a super capitalist. Like, I'm a very hardcore.
Like laissez-faire.
Yeah, I'm very laissez-faire. There's a lot of situations where, you can refer to like it being the exploitation, but it's like I guess I don't disagree that it could be exploitation, because like that's the incentive that an owner has to put like a huge ton of risk, where they risk their own wealth to be able to, you know, get ahead. And so the end result is they basically trade for effectively risk. So like you have one person who's willing to take on a lot more risk for much higher potential profits, but they also risk, losing everything, while the worker doesn't really lose anything. If they lose the worst that would happen to the worker is they lose their job and they have to find a new job. So they don't necessarily lose everything so much as like the business owner who's like staking millions of dollars into their company and then hoping that they have some money left over.
But you agree that there's situations where it's the reverse of that, right?
Oh, where they're just like taking advantage of their workers? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Also, I can also say that a lot of companies, they tend to, they will generally try to keep their workers because they know that if they don't keep their workers, then they would have a high turnover rate. And if they do, there's a monetary loss that occurs when this happens. So like a lot of companies do what they can to avoid it. That's not to say that there aren't companies that, figured out a strategy to be able to like circumvent this and then they can have high turnover. Like I know McDonald's does this, but understand that like in just basic business school, right? Like high turnover isn't seen as a good thing, High turnover, I think like the only reason why it works for like McDonald's is because they basically because that the work is like so low pay, there pretty much is no incentive for someone to stay there in the long term. So, and then considering that there's like only so many like, 18-year-olds or 17-year-olds, right? They can find some level of, how can we make some money off of this, off of people that basically suck at working. They just started working. Why would they be good at working? There's no way. So they take on that risk and in return they receive a meager amount of pay. But I don't think of this as exploitation. I would say it's exploitation if they force them. But at no point are you forced in your job. I mean, like, in order to keep your job, they basically tell you to do something, and in which case you choose whether or not to do that job. And so, like, at no point is your bodily autonomy revoked. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So, like,
I think,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it just really ties down to customer and employee policy and just how the management has to really alter.
Yeah. And that's not to say that companies don't like screw over their workers. Like it totally happens. You have to we always have to understand that there are people, and that people will have different ideas about different things. So you'll have situations where like things go horribly wrong. It's just that usually under a capitalist system, when things go horribly wrong, it usually reflects negatively on that company. And to a company, they want things to go really good. They don't want things to go horribly wrong. So like a perfect example is BP. BP is like horrible. Like what they did with like the oil spill in the Gulf and then like screwed over tons and tons of businesses by like their awful oil leak that was not like managed properly, and it destroyed huge amounts of ecosystem. This directly affected their stock value. This directly affected how they dealt business in Florida. They were effectively punished so hard that there's very few BPs in Florida, meaning that BP lost billions and billions of dollars in the wake of their mistake, this one mistake. So the question is, what happens if government makes a mistake like this? Do they get directly punished for that mistake? Or do things still go on as status quo? Or does it require a revolution of violence in order for them to be punished?
I'm not one to advocate for violence, but I would agree that there needs to be some level of understanding of the circumstances. And
yeah, like I feel like what was it? President Obama, he had like he was like anti-war, but then like he released more bombs. Yeah, he doubled down on it. And so like I would think like if honestly think about it, if any other nation did something like that where they like bombed tons and tons of families and that they were able to write off the crimes with lawyers in Qatar, which is literally what they did. They would look at oh, how many civilians is this going to kill? Oh, 60% civilians, and the other 40% is going to be terrorists? Okay, go ahead and write that off. They basically just write that off, the bomb goes off, and then boom, everybody's happy, nobody gets arrested for killing tons of people. So, if any other country other than the United States did this, then these people would be up for war crimes. Think about it. Do you honestly think, let's say if, I don't know, Georgia started doing that, or if, or if Iran started doing that, or if China started doing that, or if really any of these nations just started doing that, do you honestly think that, the United States would take that sitting down? Or that NATO would take that sitting down? Probably not. I think that there would be that you'd be up for war crimes against NATO and the United Nations. So why does the United States get merit to do this?
Yeah. Oh shit, it's starting. Let's go.
Oh, is it? Oh, cool. Holy shit. All right.
Here to facilitate and move it along, or to basically step in if things get to be too crazy. Does that sound good for you?
Yeah, it sounds great, and I love being surprised with the debate format. It's like a gotcha game. I like the randomness. It really toasts my eggs. My only requirement is that I'm going to need to be gone about 10 minutes before 7 p.m. PST or 10 p.m. EST, because I am also, it seems, going after Destiny today. So we're going for the 1-2. Hopefully that goes well.
All right, yeah, good luck with that, man.
Hey, Tim, can you start the bot?
Yeah, just give me a sec.
What can I do for you? These.
So is Stephan Molyneux in chat right now? We're about to hear a live Stephan Molyneux debate. Cool. Though I can't talk, they're not going to be able to hear me because I'm muted.
All right. Just waiting on Stefan.
He contacted me earlier, so he should be coming anytime. He's probably getting his recording stuff set up.
Cool.
Guys, if the join and leave noises get annoying, you can always turn on streamer mode temporarily. So, or you can disable the sounds in your settings.
If you're there, Vaush, I'm just curious. What's the topic for your debate with Destiny?
Well, Destiny recently put out a video that I think was brimming with unbridled contempt for the poor. So I went over it, made fun of it, and while I was making fun of it,
my
he called
God,
into
this
my
guy.
stream and got real shouty with me. I don't think I'm
course, 'cause you
exaggerating
sound
when
like
I
an
say
idiot.
that he was acting in unprecedentedly bad faith. Anyway, afterwards, we, ended the debate, and the next day he talked with some folks about the debate
This guy
in a way
sounds
that
like
I
a
thought was
socialist just
misrepresentative.
listening
So
to
I
him.
went over that in a video of mine, and now he wants to come on to debate that. So it's this unending, Ouroboros of cyclical content. When I imagine most people just want us to get over it and make out. We will not be, unfortunately. We will be arguing to the death, but hopefully it works out.
Great.
All right,
Awesome.
good luck with
Love
that.
to hear that shit.
Thank you.
You can't hear me though,
Stephan's
so
online.
whatever. Oh, Jesus.
All right.
That's so cringy.
Hey, Stefan, can you hear me?
Oh, is that
Sorry,
him?
what was that?
Is that Stefan? Oh,
Let's give it a minute.
oh. I want to hear Stefan. I want to hear this dude.
You're muted on your end, Stefan.
Come on.
All right.
Oh,
You there, Stefan?
oh man, I want to hear Stephan Molyneux.
All right. Well, while we're waiting, just for everyone joining in, this is a scheduled debate between Stephan Molyneux and Vaush. We're discussing the source of human wealth and what exploitation is. We'll be discussing this for roughly 2 hours, a little bit less. And I just also want to let you guys know we've got some stuff coming up. We've got John McAfee, and well, in March we've got John McAfee. We've got a Libertarian Roundtable and Vermin Supreme at the end of the month.
Whoa!
Hey, my man.
Also, for our users here joining in, after this is over, Vaush is going to be hosting on his server a debate with Destiny. Would you like us to post a link to that afterwards, Vaush?
Well, we'll be streaming it on D Live. I probably will just have a private call with him. But yeah, if you'd like to, go for it.
Sure. Call with him. Jeez.
Or that I could only stream this on YouTube.
Sounds so bougie already, man.
I heard about that.
I can hear this just the socialism just
I didn't catch.
seething out of his
I heard
mouth.
that you were discussing live about that whole thing. Do you mind if I ask while we're waiting here what went on there?
Yeah, it was the stupidest thing. So I was doing a video game stream. I was playing Hollow Knight. It was a great time. And I wanted to make a point about the depiction of sexualization in anime. I love me some anime, you know. So I bring up a clip from Kill La Kill, which has lots of boobies in it, you know, just ripe, resplendent fields of boobs. And we watched like a 20-second clip, which is being used to illustrate a broader argument. I'm speaking over the clip. You know, this is clearly fair use protection against, you know, copyright, what have you. But anyhow, you know, it gets copyright striked by Sony, presumably automatically. I doubt anyone sought out my like 30K view YouTube stream, which was unlisted. It's still really annoying, though. I've sent them like the email and the counterclaim, so hopefully that gets addressed soon.
Yeah, I've heard about that. Don't they have a really weird? If you challenge each strike and win on each strike, they hold it against you.
I'm afraid you cut out with that last bit. If you win on each strike.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Don't they have a really weird system where even if you challenge each strike and you win each strike, they can still hold it against you?
Yeah, you have to. I think that the strike gets cleared from your list, which if you have 3 concurrent strikes, your channel deleted. I think that the strike gets cleared from your list once it's resolved, but there are several stages in the process of it being resolved that can mean very often that you have like these bunk claims where you're waiting on a 30-day maximum response period from the claimant. And that strike remains on your profile the entire time, which can make it really nerve-wracking. Once you have 1 strike, it's like, oh god, like I'm going to resolve this as quick as I can. But if I get another bunk strike at the same time, like there go uploading privileges, and a third one, there goes the channel.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, it's pretty annoying. But it's, simple fix. I'll just never look at copyrighted material on the channel again, even if it's useful for an argument.
Yeah, that's really rough.
Looks like I can.
So how's your day going?
It's pretty good. Just relaxing.
Hey,
at
hold
home.
on.
Yeah.
Steph, we're still not getting your audio.
You're muted on your end.
Oh, sorry about that. I'm unmuted now.
There he is.
All right. Yeah.
Cool.
Good. So my day's not as important here. Let's
This will be a good one.
into it if you guys are all right with that.
Another time, then. Yes, of course.
So, Stefan, my general idea for this was, it's one general topic about capitalism, but we've got to bifurcate into the source of human wealth and what exploitation is. My thinking was that we'll kind of tackle those separately, and for the most part, like the only things we really have here is, no insult to keep it like civil and whatnot. I've seen both guys before. I don't think it's gonna be an issue, and then just basically kind of don't interrupt each other. Be kind of fair on time. So if you got a lot of long points, let the other person make a lot of stuff. But for the most part, I think you two are gonna be fine with that. So my plan is to largely stay back, guide this very loosely, and I'll only really step in if things get heated. Does that work for you?
Yeah, fine with me.
Works for me.
All right. So, the first topic here that we have is the source of human wealth. Vaush, would you like to tell us where you think human wealth comes from?
Sure. So it's a really vague question, which I like. There's a lot of openness to be found there. What do we mean by wealth? Are we talking like material price? In which case there are myriad market factors that play into it. Incredibly complicated. God knows, depression, recession, or boom, what something might be worth. I think when I tend to think of human wealth, I tend to think of a more generalized, accumulation of all of the industry, all the ingenuity, all of the material possessions, the labor-saving devices, the artwork that a individual, company, country, civilization has accumulated. And through all of these different, variants of wealth, there is one underlying cause, which is inescapable and inextricable, and it is labor. Human labor is what drives wealth. Even if you stumble into a diamond mine or find oil bubbling the surface of a field, those things are
have a guy
valuable in
dig
their
a
own
hole
course.
over and over.
But
That'll
the
definitely
process of mining,
equate
the process
to
of
health, idiot.
refining, of advertising and selling the product, of consuming, of building machines to use these things,
Already,
of
man, the
deriving
fucking
a use
socialist
value
bringing in some
from
economics that he
these
doesn't
objects.
understand.
All of this stems from labor, and it is for
all
that
labor.
reason
It's
I
all
believe
labor.
that when we credit
Never
the
risk
wealth of
or
a
like anything
civilization,
that's not
a
like
country,
tied to
a firm,
like physically
a person,
moving a rock.
we should elevate those whose labor has brought that to pass. In some civilizations, this has been slaves, more so than any other group.
Slaves,
And,
we
our
had a lot of
civilization
extra
today,
money
that
from
is the
slaves
common
because
worker
of
for the most
labor.
part. The
Yeah,
people
that's
who labor
logical.
and
That
toil
makes sense.
to provide
What the-
services or to produce goods, to mine, to work, to
guy's so
strive to produce art.
cringy, man.
These are the people who I believe build wealth.
It's the people who build wealth.
Okay, and same
good
question
job,
to
man.
you.
It is through labor that wealth is built.
Alright, so
Jesus.
the
All right,
source
come
of
on, Stefan.
human wealth, you kind of got to
Blast
answer
this
two
guy's
questions.
asshole.
And you can say, well, sure, human beings are necessary for the creation of wealth. Yeah, okay. I mean, that sort of doesn't add a huge amount to the equation, in my humble opinion. But what I would say is we actually have a very good explanation as to where wealth comes from. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to explain why there was so little wealth throughout almost all of human history. And then why you sort of look at that line of wealth, right? All of human history, people were surviving on virtually nothing. Starvation was rampant, even in civilized areas like the Roman Empire. You could have feast or famine within, 5 miles of each other. So why were we so poor throughout almost all of human history? And then you get this massive, I mean, to call it exponential is an insult to exponentiality, massive increase in wealth since the 18th century, first in agriculture and then in industrial production. So what changed? What was the difference? That's the first thing that needs to be sort of explained and understood. And the second thing is that we also need to explain that when you get more free markets, when you get the allocation of or the earning of goods and services and the control of goods and services by those who are best able to maximize their use, why is it that we get this pretty wild income disparity? And it's true in general that the rising tide lifts all boats, but boy, it seems to shoot up some pretty high and some much slower. So the answer to that is pretty easy to understand if you are familiar with, Austrian economics, that kind of stuff, right? So the first thing is that there are some people, and I sort of hate to put it in this way, but they're magic. They are magicians of productivity, and nobody knows exactly why. It's like saying, why is a particular singer or a particular baseball player, I mean, why are they so good? Why are they so popular? It's a mix of skill and charisma and hard work and all of that, and resisting temptation. But some people are just magic when it comes to the creation of wealth. Now, if you want a wealthy society and you have free markets, which is the only way to get a wealthy society, then what happens is those people tend to end up accumulating more and more resources. So if you can get twice the crops out of a particular piece of land, you're able to bid a lot more to own that land. And because of that, you get massive increases in agricultural productivity. And there's a very well-known, or somewhat well-known equation for this. It's called
this is
Price's
good. This is coming
law,
from somebody who can
It's common
read.
throughout human beings. It's common throughout the animal kingdom.
Look at that.
It's common in just about every meritocracy that you will look at, and it goes a little something like this. In a meritocracy, like where you can earn and profit and compete, the square root of the number of people involved in an endeavor produce half the value. So if you have a company of 10,000 people, 100 people of those 10,000 people produce half the value, and of those 100 people, 10 produce half the value. So in other words, you have 10,000 people, and 10 of those 10,000 people produce fully 1/4 of the entire value. Now, why is this the case? I don't know. Nobody knows, but it doesn't really matter because it's a reality we have to deal with. So in a free market, those who have this magic ability to just create, Steve Jobs like, the opposite of Elizabeth Holmes like, they have this incredible ability to create wealth through passion, through creativity, through organizational genius, through converting to a Model T assembly line, as Henry Ford did for all of his other considerable faults. So there's these magic productivity people, and in a free market, they tend to accumulate the most resources, and they massively increase the wealth in society, and that creates a lot of resentment. And then people say, aha, those people only have money because they've stolen from you, and then they run to the government to steal it back, and everything kind of collapses Venezuelan style. And that explains why, when these people were inhibited from exercising their productive genius in the free market throughout most of human history, we remain poor. You can see when the free market began to occur in the 18th century, particularly in England and the Netherlands, you can see when the free market began to operate in the realm of land, that you had more and more productive landowners taking over land. The bourgeoisie of the landowners, so to speak, they elbowed aside a lot of the
look at
aristocrats,
you.
and you got a massive increase in
Look
food.
at
Like
you.
to 20
Pointing out
times
good
the food
stuff.
productivity has occurred in the early
There you
Middle
go.
Ages was occurring in the
Proletariat
18th century.
took
We're talking
away
about
the
crops,
bourgeoisie's
crop rotation,
land,
turnips,
the
like you name it. It was
kulaks.
just incredible. what people were able to do with the productivity of the land, because they were able to compete. And land was sorted according to who was the most productive in a market mechanism. So that is the source of human wealth, is letting the free market determine who gets generally to bid the most on the resources, and that's the people who can make the most use out of those resources, the most productive use out of those resources. And if you allow that process to occur, then more and more people get wealthier and wealthier in society as a whole. And the last point I wanted to make is it's a pretty temporary situation, right? Because we don't like, and I'm sure Vaush doesn't like it, I don't like it either, this idea of this sort of hereditary economic monopoly. But the reality is that the people who tend to be very wealthy, it really, really doesn't last at all. So if you have a family wealth, about 60% of the time that wealth is gone within one generation. It's been flown, it's been frittered. This rags to riches to rags story that's very common, or they say shirt sleeves in 3 generations. By the second generation, fully 90% of the money is gone. So these geniuses, they appear like comets, or I guess more like meteors in the night sky. They flash, they burn bright, they burn out, and other people come along to take their place, and there's this constant churn of classes and wealth. But in general, it's a rather bumpy but significant.
I think there is some levels of wealth where it's not necessarily
of the free market,
easy for them to leave that portion of wealth.
If left to operate,
if there is like old money
the
that's like
enforcement of
super
property
hard.
rights,
I can contend with like opposite arguments, and it makes sense.
So, just a quick note here, chat. I forgot to text. So if you guys are,
dude's
you won't be able to talk, of course, but you can type, discuss this as it's going on in the debate chat. If you want to invite your friends, the invite code is just Blue Politics. We've got another 100 minutes, and I'm going to mostly step back now. Vaush, if you want to just go ahead and start with your response.
Yeah, I'm gonna need some time for this. So this is a pretty standard, like, Randian great man explanation, which, and the great man theory, I should say, is widely discredited in sociological.
I hate to interrupt right at the beginning here. Let's do each other a favor. Hang on. I'll just be a sec. Let's just do each other a favor. Let's not characterize each other's arguments. That's such a waste of time, and it's so boring. Well, this is a reductionist and blah, 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 and it's a Randian this. And let's just both go back and forth with the actual content of the debate, rather than wasting everyone's time characterizing what we think about and how standard it is and where it comes from. Let's just deal with the points, okay? Because
it's not even Randian.
The point of being able to identify what type of argument a person is making is so you can tie their arguments to academic arguments that have taken place in the past. If we reduce all discussion down to he said, she said, or he said in our case, then we can pull essentially anything out of our ass that we like. What this is, essentially, is great man theory. And I don't find this to be a particularly effective descriptor of, well, frankly, anything. So we begin with your description of the why wealth suddenly ballooned upwards during the 18th century, and has since then, our wealth has increased tremendously since that point. And I would argue that the reason for this is not because the government suddenly took their hands off the reins and allowed these Übermensch to walk society and do as they would, which drags the entire productivity of the nation upwards. I would argue it's because of the Industrial Revolution, which is, I think, far more descriptive, because we saw equivalent increases in productivity pretty much across the board in countries that had high levels of economic freedom, in countries that are despotic and totalitarian. The effects of the Industrial Revolution seem to near ubiquitously increase the wealth and productivity of society, no matter what policies they have concerning individual property rights. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that I believe that capitalism hasn't had an impact on the development of wealth in our societies. I think it has. I think it's and it's just absolutely a head and shoulders improvement above feudalism or above mercantile capitalism. But the idea that capitalism's effectiveness, for whatever percentage it is responsible for the increase of human wealth, is because of these great men, these people who stride head and shoulders above the peasants who contribute more. I don't see that. In none of the research I've engaged in, none of the analysis, I have seen done of firms or of countries. Nothing I have seen has shown me that the entirety of the productivity we see from any level of society is done by a small elite core of do-gooders who preside above it. It is, in fact, the tireless work of everyone who participates in that system. It is through that we are able to reap the benefits of an industrialized society. After all, the process of invention, to create, say, for example, your factory machine, this is work. It is labor. The person who has done this is a worker. To operate that machine is likewise work. Whether you believe there is some differential in the relative levels of productivity between those who create and those who simply operate machines, that
value is not
exist,
tied to labor.
But I don't
like
believe there is a great difference.
I can't emphasize that
find
enough.
Strong explanatory variables.
Because if it was, you could dig a hole over and over and over and get a ton of labor out of it. It doesn't work.
The existence
doesn't
of
work
a few
that way.
highly privileged individuals. In fact, your argument that these people are shooting stars that emerge quickly and then burn out quickly is an argument that these people were never that great to begin with. That instead a incredibly complicated system.
We're not
of
talking about their
complexities and
greatness.
circumstances
You're just fucking
conspired to bring them
conflating
to a
that.
position of
I
influence,
hate
and
this
then,
guy.
Eventually
I hate
does to them what it does to
socialists.
everyone, which is
I hate them so much.
Altogether, I just I do feel as though your
I want to
explanatory,
ask him that question
sense
so
of this,
bad,
the-
but
the-
I'm
the great
muted.
man.
I want to
just-
ask him that
it feels
question.
very,
I just want to say, do
disheartening
you
or
honestly
like
believe
cucked
that
to me, I guess would be
labor?
the best word I
What
have
did he
for
just
it.
say? Cucked?
Because what it is
What
essentially
the
telling
fuck?
most people is that in spite of their
What the hell?
incredible
Oh,
level of
God,
individual
so
talent, productivity, whatever, if you're not at the top of society, you just weren't cut out to make it.
Yeah.
It's a system that
That's
justifies
definitely what he
the
meant.
placement of one man above the other, and
Yeah,
that
that's
to me
definitely
is
what
the
he meant.
absolute opposite of freedom. And that's why
Oh
I stick to a more materialist analysis of civilizational wealth.
Wow, I would really like it if we could get a debate going, but it looks like I'm going to bring facts, reason, and evidence to the table, and you're going to say you don't like the outcome and you've never heard that argument before. So,
Go for
okay,
it,
well
friend.
then what I guess I'll ask you, if we can get a bit more back and forth going, why do you think, let's say, Brad Pitt, and by the way, it's not a great man theory, because that's very
Yeah,
very
it's
sexist
not.
of you. I mean,
Exactly.
there are lots of women
It's
who
not.
contributed enormously to the economy as well, and of course you pointed out Ayn Rand, a great novelist and philosopher, but why do you think, if everyone's equal and it's just the amount of labor, I mean, I've made a movie, I've made a number of movies, a number of documentaries.
May I make a brief
by now.
correction?
Hang
I
on.
don't think everyone is
I've made a
equal.
bunch of movies by now, and why do you think that the leading man, like the star or the leading woman, whoever it's going to be, let's sort of Brad Pitt or whatever, why do you think Brad Pitt gets paid more than the sound guy on a movie set?
So to clarify, I don't think everyone's equal. There are obviously individual differences between people. Some people are far more productive than others. I just don't think that the reason why our society experiences such high levels of income and social inequality is because those on top are these, you describe them as magical people. I think magic is as bad an explanatory, gesture we're going to get for any social phenomena. But the reason why Brad Pitt is paid more is because he can negotiate for more. In a free market, he's a front-runner star. People know him. His addition to a movie will bring in more customers. His relative market value allows him to wait.
So sorry to interrupt. So
hey,
that's interesting.
James.
So you've given me two explanations there, which seem
Twitch
somewhat
streams
contradictory.
when?
And
Well,
it's
I
really,
don't
really interesting.
generally
This is kind of, I think,
stream
at the core
on
of the
Twitch
issue.
because I get
So
banned
you're
really
saying
quick.
that Brad Pitt makes more, like he makes like what, $10 million a film or something like that.
I just
He
throw
makes
it on
more than the
Facebook. I
sound
don't
guy
care. It's fine.
Simply because he negotiates better. In other words, if the sound guy had Brad Pitt's agents, the sound guy would also be making $10 million a movie? Or is it
Not because he
the
negotiates
audience
better.
prefers Brad Pitt, he's more singular, he has more of a monopoly on Brad Pittness, so to speak, than the sound guy who's kind of interchangeable?
I will agree that Brad Pitt does have a monopoly on Brad Pitt, but I don't think it's because he negotiates better. It's not the skill of negotiation that matters here. It's because he is in a better position to
negotiate. Is why he's paid more, right?
Yes, he's in a better position to negotiate, or his agent
Oh,
is in a
boy.
better position to negotiate, because past circumstances have
Here
led
it
Brad Pitt
comes.
to be more marketable than some random sound guy. I mean, the sound guy's
He's going to say that the labor theory of value and the
in the movie and the
freaking...
sound.
Oh, God.
Well,
If
yes,
he
he
wasn't
works
there,
for the
the sound would
production,
be
but
pretty
he's
bad.
not in the film.
No, but why do you, I mean, past circumstances doesn't explain anything.
Past
So
circumstances
why do you
explains
think
everything.
that Brad
Hey, James.
Pitt gets paid?
Oh, there's two James.
Times
There's James Hauser and James Arquet.
The same reason any popular person can be paid money to speak at a university, because more people are interested in seeing them.
Okay, good. So it's not the labor that determines his income. I mean, there's many people who work harder, so to speak, and invest more labor in the film than Brad Pitt does, right? He kind of bungees in for the shoot, and a lot of times movies have been in preparation for a year or two before. Brad Pitt might come in for a month or two. So there's people who put out far more work into the movie but paid far less. And so this idea that labor is what's driving value is falsified by the movie star example, because many people work much harder who get paid a small fraction of what Brad Pitt does for less work.
You said that Brad Pitt is being paid more because his labor is worth more, and then you just switched to saying that was my argument. I don't think his labor determines how much he's paid. I think his market value determines what he's paid. I agree. Brad Pitt probably works as hard, probably
how
quite
do
a
you
bit less
conflate
hard
that
than your
labor
average
is?
stage
Oh, he
hand.
just
That's
screwed
tough
up
work.
his
I've been
own
on sets before.
argument.
It looks very difficult.
Ah!
Oh
my God, he screwed up his own argument.
Comforts I'm sure they don't get to enjoy. I don't think that labor is an explanatory value for one's wage or the price of their services. I think it explanatory value for what it gets produced in society, for what is worthwhile in society.
Well, it's because people like to watch Brad Pitt. And so it's the customers themselves who determine the value of the contributions.
Please,
in other words,
just blast his
you and I,
asshole
let's say
with
we're
this
just hanging out and we
freaking,
say,
with
hey, let's do a
actual
movie. Let's go
economics,
see a movie,
like
right?
actual
And
proven
let's say we're
economics.
just
Not a
complete
single economist
manic
agrees
sound
that
aficionados.
labor
We're just
equals
crazy
value.
about the sound
It
guy, right? And
doesn't
there are people who
work.
are like this. There are
It
people who
doesn't
don't see a
matter
movie
which one
just
you
because
talk
some
to.
guy wrote the score.
Any
He's like,
educated
oh, that guy's
economist
really
will
amazing.
pretty much come to
But
that
most people are
conclusion.
like,
It's
Brad Pitt is really
ridiculous.
cool. He's a good actor. He's handsome. He's got abs for days and all that. So they'll go and see the movie because Brad Pitt's in it. And so Brad Pitt is a good investment. Like, it's not that he costs $10 million. He makes the movie like $50 million because he sells $50 million worth of tickets that wouldn't be sold if he wasn't in the movie. So Brad Pitt is paid 100 or 1,000 times more than the sound guy because people will go and see the movie for Brad Pitt, but they don't really care about the sound guy. Now, if there was no sound guy, the sound would be bad and the movie wouldn't work, but it's a lot easier to get another sound guy than another Brad Pitt because there's only one. So it is the end customers who determine the value, and I don't know how you end up with, well, there's no such thing as disproportionate or wildly disproportionate economic value when Brad Pitt is paid 1,000 or 10,000 times more than, say, an extra. Well, that seems like quite a spike in income, and that's all determined by the customer. It's not determined by the negotiation.
But someone
It's
is
not
willing to pay
determined
for
by
it,
the
exactly,
bosses.
because it's
not
someone who's
determined by the
actually
director or the
understands
studio. It's
economics,
fundamentally
and the
determined
other
by
is a
the
fucking
customers
fairy
and how
tale
much
land.
They want to pay Brad Pitt.
So a few things. For one, I never said that a person's like price or wealth or income or earning is determined by their the labor that they produce. That's determined by a
just
wide
said
variety of
value
market
was
factors, which you have
labor.
just,
Why?
explained. I do want to correct you. On that. It's not actually the customers
I will
that
kill
lead to
this
his wage.
guy.
It is the fact that he and his agent are willing to negotiate
Man,
for a wage that they believe that the studio would be willing to pay in light of what the customers would bring for additional revenue to the movie.
hate them
There
so
are a
much.
wide variety of complicated economic factors that go into this, but none of them are that Brad Pitt is a magical Superman who strides atop all the other production staff in the movie set and is singly responsible for all of the value in that movie. It could entirely well be that somebody else who was born in circumstances similar to Brad Pitt could have ended up being the Brad Pitt, or, you know, with some different name, of course, but a similar level of popularity. And it has nothing to do with any genetic or circumstantial or magical component of their birth. It's just a product of circumstances that has placed Brad Pitt in a position of prominence that allows him to negotiate for his wages. But when it comes to what builds civilizational wealth, what truly builds society and drives it forward, it's not popular people who get popular because they have a good agent or because they have a good PR team or because they got lucky. It's the hard work of millions or billions of human beings.
Well, yeah, but I mean, this, I don't even know what to say. People have been working hard for about 150,000 years since we first hived off from the apes. So people have been working very hard,
because
gruelingly hard, gruesomely
is
hard. I
not
mean, if you look
tied
at
to value.
ancient skeletons, a lot of them are like
Turns
bowed
out
down by the
is
amount of
not
work. Their
tied to
joints are
value.
shot because they had to run
So
all that. I mean, people
Stephan
worked like
Molyneux
crazy
is saying
throughout
that,
most of human history,
and he's
but something
right.
changed.
And
Like 200,
I
give or
swear
take,
to you,
200 years
man,
ago, give or take. Something changed.
these socialists,
to the point where we got this 20, 30, 40, 50 times increase in human wealth. And it's not just because people decided to work 50 times harder. Human beings were working about as hard as they humanly could throughout most of human history, and something changed. Now, I would argue what changed was morality. What changed was
all right, come
there
on,
was a
Stefan.
move for
Come
a
on, you
variety
can do a
of
better argument
both
than that.
Intellectual and economic
Morality,
and political and
really?
reasons. There was a move towards a lowering of barriers for trade, a respect for property rights and contract, and a general diminishment in the random violence in society.
He's
whether
right
you
here.
put that
He's
down
right.
to the fact that there were executions of
right.
sociopathic prisoners
I'm
for
glad he's right
hundreds
about
of years, or whether you put that down to the Black Death, or whether you put that down to, as some people do, and I think it's a very good theory, that parenting improved. And when you stopped brutalizing your children as much, they grew up to be more empathetic and less prone to aggression and violence. But something changed to the point where property rights were more respected, barriers to entries fell, and violence also diminished within society. And those three things, right? Barriers to entries falling, and property rights being respected, and contracts being enforced, and a diminishment of violence in society, that allows for the intellectual meritocracy to begin to harness nature's scarce resources and energies and become massively productive. And that is really the source of wealth. It's not just the fact that people move their arms. They've been doing that throughout all of human history.
The reason wealth productivity went up during the 18th century was because of the Industrial Revolution, because people invented machines, built factories, built conveyor lines, automated and processed the labor, refinement, built steam engines and coal plants, and revitalized
so it's not
global
to
trade.
labor.
There are a number of factors.
It is not
Why
tied
did they
to
do
labor.
all of that? I mean, the ancient Romans knew about the steam engine. The ancient Romans knew about
the ancient Romans could not have
stuff
kickstarted the Industrial
the
Revolution.
Industrial Revolution, but they didn't. Why? Because they all owned slaves. It took the shattering of serfdom. It took the shattering of the ancient practice of human
slavery. We had the
slavery,
Industrial Revolution in America
in order
when they
to.
owned slaves.
I'm sorry.
Wait, Americans owned slaves when the Industrial
What?
Revolution took
No,
place in
you're
America.
wrong.
You can simultaneously own
You're
slaves and develop
actually
an Industrial
wrong.
Revolution. They couldn't have developed an Industrial Revolution back during the Roman times. The technology just wasn't there. I agree there are ideological
No, that's not true. No, that looks like. I mean,
it's just
I
not
don't mean
true.
to
He's
pull
right. It's not
credentials
true.
here because it's all nonsense. I got a whole history of Rome presentation, graduate degree in history. Oh no, there was a lot.
I'm
of
well
technology
aware
in
of what
ancient
you
Rome.
speak
They
on
could have done it,
Rome.
but they didn't want to invent labor-saving devices because they had invested all of their capital into slaves. So when you invest your capital into slaves, you don't want to create labor-saving devices because it diminishes the value of your slave. Each slave cost about the equivalent of a medium expensive car in the modern West. And so there were very strong political and economic reasons to do with the immorality of slave ownership that had to do with why. Now, there was slaves, of course, in America, and the North industrialized faster, got wealthier faster because they didn't have slaves, and it was the British, and in particular the British Empire, that worked feverishly in the late 18th, 19th century to end slavery, not just in England, not just in the British Empire, but around the world. Worked very, very hard, and like would grab the slave ships and free the slaves and lock up the slave owners and worked very, very hard. It was largely a Christian mission, of course, but they worked very, very hard to end slavery. So the fact that America had slavery, well, America inherited the Industrial Revolution to a large degree from England, which was largely serf and slave free by the time it started. And the industrialized North had a far greater economic progress than the slave-owning South. So I don't see how the example of America does anything but reinforce the thesis.
Okay, so a number of points here. For one, there have been plenty of labor-saving devices that were invented over the time when slavery was commonplace in civilizations across the world. The printing press, the cotton gin, numerous inventions which were meant to make agriculture easier. A field that slaves almost exclusively
it happened post-slavery.
Were presided over, of course,
but
back
whatever.
when agriculture was, the
what's
industry
200
of the day,
years? What's the difference between like 100 years or 80 years? There is
certainly a relationship between the development of the Industrial Revolution and the existence of slaves. But the idea that Rome could have had
no idea what the hell he's talking about.
Well, both, I suppose. The diminishment of, because I agree there is a proportional relationship between the industrialization of society and the reduction of reliance on slave labor. But the idea that Rome could have just decided to do one, and then it took us 2,000 years to decide, actually, what if machines
No, but that's
are
not
better
what I
than
said, Vaush.
enslaving
I didn't
humans?
say
Whoa,
Rome
whoa,
just
whoa,
could have
whoa, whoa.
decided to do it. I said that they had slaves, which you just admitted.
They had slaves
the
and they
diminishment
had
of slavery
labor-saving
was
devices.
essential for the development of industrialization. So
Civilizations
it's
have
not
had-
just a decision arbitrarily. It's based upon the foundational morals and economics of the ancient world, which was
Civilizations have had slaves and they've had labor-saving devices for as long as both have existed. When the Industrial Revolution took place, the material wealth and the productivity of our societies increased massively. But it wasn't because everyone just decided that it was moral to start doing so. It was because of the incredible ingenuity of inventors and the hard work of the people who manned those factories that civilizations pulled themselves into the industrial era. I reject this assertion that it was a moral, zeitgeist or a moral paradigm shift that led to the overwhelming increase in the productivity of human beings.
All right,
he's
let it
wrong
just be
about that.
noticed
He
that
really
Vaush has
is.
said that he
It's not
just
because of
rejects it.
morality.
Okay,
It
good.
is because of the
well, I reject your
industrialization.
rejection, and we've completely solved the problem. You just have to say, I reject. Okay, so...
Well, I provided a counter-argument. If you'd like to
No,
provide
you
a
didn't.
counter
You
to my
just said
counter.
that there were machines in the ancient world. Well, of course there were. I mean, you could have carried water, or you could have had an aqueduct. You could have dragged things along through a forest, or you could have built a road. Of course there was labor-saving devices in the ancient world. So what? I mean, the fact is there still was not this massive liftoff and takeoff of human wealth. And for that, you require
the Industrial
efficiency,
Revolution.
the idea that it was the laborers within the factory that produced the wealth, when laborers in the fields before, the slave laborers in the fields were working even harder than the factory workers were in the Industrial Revolution, and for, of course, less pay, because they virtually got no pay. They got room and board and some rudimentary health care, and that's about it. So the idea that it was human labor that somehow drove it is to say, well, I guess they just worked 10 times harder than the slaves did, and they didn't. No. It's
No.
nothing to do with that.
It was
The
not
fact
a
is that
sudden
when
decision.
labor starts,
Sorry.
hang on, I'll finish in a sec.
All
I'll
right.
finish in a sec. When labor starts to cost money, rather than you just buy a slave and then you buy and burn that slave until they, I guess you don't even want a pension. You just burn them out till they die. But when labor starts to cost money, then the first thing you want to do is start investing in labor-saving devices. And that harnesses and extends and expands the power of the laborer. The economic efficiency of the laborer is vastly enhanced by being attached to a factory machine that does a huge amount more work for him.
Yes.
And so when labor costs money, you start
like,
saving
no.
money by introducing labor-saving
Jesus.
devices. That frees up labor to do other work that is more productive and adds to the value of society as a whole.
Yes.
So again, to clarify, labor-saving devices have been invented as quickly as the people of their time could for as long as humans have been around, including the time when we owned slaves. While there is undeniably a relationship between the economic value of a labor-saving device relative to the availability of free labor, that doesn't negate the fact that humans have tried to increase the efficiency of their society for as long as has been possible. And I take issue with this spurious straw man you keep assigning, where
Yeah,
you
it's a straw
describe the
man. It's a
Industrial
straw man.
Revolution
Facts
as
are
simply
straw man.
workers choosing to work harder. It was workers.
No, it wasn't workers choosing to work harder, you
Hold
moron!
on,
I never
Stefan.
said workers choosing to work
What
harder.
the heck?
You
Ah!
said you just said that my argument was that workers must have started to work 10 times harder to account for the increase in wealth production during the
No,
Industrial
that was a mocking of your argument. That wasn't my argument. You'll need to.
Okay. Well, then to clarify, it has nothing to do with workers suddenly choosing to work harder, and everything to do with
I never
workers.
said workers suddenly choosing
May I
to work
please,
harder. What are you talking
Stefan,
about?
I am addressing my own argument and clarifying my position. So
Well,
to
then why are you
clarify,
saying it's what I said?
Your position is retarded.
I think you
That's why.
mischaracterized
It's
my
literally dumb. I don't know what to
Well,
tell
okay, so
this.
here's what we should do.
well,
Here's
well,
what we
let me.
should do.
I would like to
If you
finish
wa-
the point
if you want
before
to
we
take issue with something
gallivant
I've
and
said,
complain about
like
it.
here's my suggestion. Here's how we use our economically productive tools, right? I don't know if you can see me or not. You got a pen, you got a piece of paper, right? So what you do is, if I use a phrase that you want to take issue with, which is obviously perfectly fine, that's the point of a debate, you can jot
He's
down the
gonna
phrase.
hate this.
Because I'm telling
Watch,
you, man,
watch, he's
relying
gonna
on your
respond
memory
to it really
is not
negatively.
working because you keep
I trust
saying
the
I said
people
things
who
that
are
I never
watching
said.
to remember you as you said it. And if my chat would like to rise up and say that he did indeed characterize my argument in that way, you are all free to. But until that point, I would like to say that it has nothing to do with workers just deciding to work harder, and everything to do with some workers who are inventors, or politicians, which is in itself a form of work, who developed the labor-saving devices of the Industrial Revolution, which then allowed the workers, working as always, to increase the productivity of our society. It has nothing to do with people choosing to work harder. It has nothing to do with a moral paradigm shift. It has everything to do with a change in the material circumstances of our society and how it allows our workers to increase their productive efficiency. We continue to see this today. The existence of the internet has revolutionized the material efficiency of our society. This has nothing to do with a moral paradigm shift. It's simply new technology allowing for us to create and distribute in new and inventive ways. Always, of course, this is being done by people who work. And it is for that reason I credit them for the bountiful society we now find ourselves within.
Okay, so
yeah, now how do we?
You've accepted that the end of slavery helped make workers more productive, but you don't consider it a moral paradigm shift for slavery to have ended. So I guess you don't view it as an improvement in human morality for slavery to have ended. I'm not quite sure I follow.
I don't think people abandoned slavery for machinery as a more efficient form of economic production for moral reasons. I think they did it for material reasons, because you can make more money from a factory than you ever could from a plantation. Of course, this is somewhat simplified. You know, the actual particularities of economics are incredibly complicated, but generally speaking, the Industrial Revolution de-emphasized the necessity of slavery. I don't think that slavery is a good thing. I'm glad it's gone, but I don't think we made that transition for moral reasons.
Yes, we did. We literally did.
Because in
I hate this.
Sorry to ask a question and just interrupt.
I hate this guy. His understanding of history is so jaded to fit his stupid paradigm that doesn't work, that no expert actually agrees in.
The abolitionist movement, certainly. But they weren't doing it for economic reasons. The people who built the factories weren't doing it because they knew they would be replacing slaves and that would be freeing the slaves. The people who built factories wanted to make money. The abolitionists weren't doing abolitionist work for the benefit of their economy. They were doing it for moral reasons. They, of course, had a moral incentive. But factory owners, the inventors who built these machines and industry lines, I don't think they did it.
Misappropriated the labor.
Emancipation of slaves.
Okay, now I'm really confused, because you said there was no moral considerations in the ending of slavery, and now you're saying that the abolitionists who largely drove the ending of slavery had significant or foundational moral goals and moral concerns.
Yeah, because
so
he's
really
definitely
lost now
wrong.
in Vaush land, I'm afraid. You'll have to give me a compass to lead me out of the woods.
Oh my God, I hate this
Plenty of moral
guy.
reasons to the end of slavery. I don't think the development of the machines necessary to create the Industrial
Because like this guy
were
hurts
done
my
for
head.
moral reasons. I thought they were done for material
Well, I'm glad I'm not the only
Now,
one
that may have
freaking
led-
losing my mind over this guy.
That's exactly what I said. I mean, you're completely agreeing with my point, which is that you get rid of slavery, and then the labor costs mean that you want to invest in labor-saving devices, which drives productivity of labor far beyond anything slavery could have ever achieved. So, yeah, you got the moral goal, you get rid of slavery, and after slavery is gotten rid of, and of course, now there was some ugly things that occurred as well. It's easy to look at history and say it's kind of ugly at times based on sort of modern considerations, which I accept and understand, but there was, of course, a lot of the enclosure movement, kicking people off ancestral lands for both good and bad and in different reasons and so on. There was some negative stuff in it for sure. But I think that we can say and I think we both agree, that there were moral considerations that had to exist prior to the excess labor that drove, and the costly excess labor that drove the Industrial Revolution. You had to get rid of slavery in order to build wealth. And that, to me, is one of the foundational moral aspects of the market and the foundation of wealth. And this dichotomy between, well, the factory owners didn't build their factories in order to end slavery. Well, yeah, of course, you'd have to end slavery before there's even an incentive to build a factory. But the reality is, of course, that you don't require, this is the wonderful thing about the free market, you don't require moral considerations in order for the actions of everyone involved in the free market to benefit mankind. I mean, it's a beautiful thing. I mean, it would be great if everyone woke up as you do, as I do, as a lot of these listeners do. They woke up in the morning and thought, gosh, how can I best serve the world today? How can I best make the world a better place for people in harm and people in suffering and all of that? It would be great if people woke up every day and thought that way. Some do, a lot don't. And the good news, of course, is that in a sort of communist system, in a tyrannical system, the people who want to profit, they do so on mountains and rivers of blood, whereas in a free market economy, the people who want to profit can't force you to buy their goods and have to appeal in some way and in some
All right,
manner.
we
to
are
that
we
which
are
benefits
so
you.
off the original topic now. I would like to return and perhaps conclude this tangent on the Industrial Revolution. So to be perfectly clear, the Industrial Revolution took place
like
because
the Industrial
material, not
Revolution
moral
definitely
circumstances,
I mean,
allowed
it was
for
a
a
little bit of
massive
morality.
increase
It's
in
a
the
little bit of
productivity
it's both. It's
productivity of
both.
civilization.
It's easily
This
both.
change in our
I
productivity
think anybody
did
who's
change
reasonable
the
can come up
economics
with
of
that. Can
slavery,
conclude
which
that. Yep, that
upended
makes sense.
many of these slave-oriented businesses that existed alongside and even after the Industrial Revolution, because of course the Industrial Revolution took place before the abolition of slavery in many places. What's more, slavery continues to exist to this day across the world. We saw other forms of exploitative labor come alongside the Industrial Revolution, such as child labor, such as workers being stacked in tenements, spotting out 8 or 9 babies because they knew that at 12 they would have to send them off to the factories because it was the only way to afford their company-owned tenancy. The idea that the Industrial Revolution was part of some moral surge towards the free market and individualism and proprietarianism is ridiculous, because the Industrial Revolution had comparable effects in societies that hadn't seen the free market touch them for a century
My
afterwards.
God,
The
this
Industrial
guy.
Revolution had the exact same effect on Soviet Russia as few and far between the rights for workers were
thank goodness
there
for
at the
Soviet
time.
Russia.
They nonetheless
Thank
saw a
goodness for
comparable
Soviet
increase in the
Russia.
productivity of our society.
Yeah, because Soviet
it has
Russia
nothing to do-
definitely
and I need to make this
understands global
perfectly clear,
economics.
nothing to
That's
do
why their system
with the
worked
free
really good, and
market,
it created
with a moral
that
decision
industrial
to,
revolution thanks to
evolve
communism.
into, laissez-faire economics,
idiot.
and everything to do with material circumstances of society changing. Labor-saving devices have been produced for as long as humans have been ingenious enough to produce them. Slaves have existed since the beginning of humanity up until now. These are parallel but not intersecting
thanks to
courses
communism.
of material and moral considerations, considerations, and
communism.
merging the two of them
With the power of
errantly,
communism.
carelessly, only serves to dilute an understanding of the actual driving forces of history.
Yeah. Wow, that was really intelligent.
All right, well, that's a long description without any particular causality. Now, of course, the effects of the Industrial Revolution had impacts on non-free market or less laissez-faire societies, of course. Of course, because things that get invented in the free market, shockingly, can be transferred. There's not this magical force field between borders that all the things that are invented and created, the knowledge of better farming and winter crops like turnips, the steam engine, can magically pass from one country to another, even if the second country is not particularly free. I mean, believe it or not, you can get internet in North Korea, even though North Korea is a post-communist society and the largest open-air slave pen in human history. So yes, of course, you get wonderful things invented in the free market economies, and they can themselves transfer to non-free market economies. I don't really
The
think
idea
that,
that
you pointed out
all
much of any value
labor-saving
there.
productions have been produced in free market societies that other
I'm
non-free
sorry,
market
can you just, I
societies
missed
have
the
just
beginning of that. I was talking. Can you go ahead?
I'd be happy to. The idea that all labor-saving devices and all economic productivity is produced by free market societies and then aped and copied by
I'm sorry, when did
non-free
I
market
say
societies.
all? When did I say
is,
all?
I'm sorry,
all
most,
without exception, no matter what. I mean, come on, don't be. There's always
is
complexities in
entirely
these. Sometimes it goes both ways. But when I say free markets generate goods, which then cross into non-free market societies, I didn't say all goods. And you find one exception, and the whole thesis falls to the ground. Come on. I mean, let's.
No, actually,
let's
I was
try
trying
and
to
deal with
address
each
the
other as
central tenet
nuanced
of
and
your argument,
intelligent
which is
people
the
rather than these
spurious
ridiculous
and
absolutes.
ahistorical idea that all of the developments in wealth production in non-free market societies, which invalidate your argument that these are fundamentally a derivative of the free market, came from osmosis between borders with free market societies. The truth of the matter is, it's entirely possible for the wealth of a society to be built up tremendously by a totalitarian society. China right now, which is by no means communist, but I also wouldn't fairly describe as a free market, is ballooning in economic and social productivity, in spite of the fact that much of the ability to trade as a firm within China is limited by the CCP's sort of central tenets of economic behavior. In spite of that, they grow tremendously. The truth of the matter is, and sometimes this hurts for folks to learn, but freedom and productivity aren't necessarily 1-1 ratios with each other. We have to fight tirelessly to ensure both of them. But to assume that they're both intricately tied is to assume all productive societies are free and all unproductive societies are unfree. And that is not true. There are many free societies throughout history that have at the same time been materially deprived, and there are many ludicrously productive societies that have been tyrannical.
So if I could just jump in real quick, just to try to pull this together, I'm gonna try to summarize you guys' arguments as best I can in a single sentence, and just tell me first if I'm wrong, but I think this might help us move closer to the topic here. Vaush, you believe that the source of human wealth is primarily labor, and Stephan, you believe it's primarily innovation. Is that correct?
No, I believe that the source of human wealth is property rights, self-ownership, and a freedom from violence. That the moral imperatives to not use force to get what you want, to respect self-ownership, to respect personhood, to respect property and contracts, the universal validity to promises and property and the sanctity of the human body. That is the foundation of wealth, and it results from a moral commitment to universal moral values, to ethical values that are universal, and to opposing the initiation of the use of force. And I think Vaush's argument is something like a mysterious ahistorical asteroid hit the Earth and we got wealth. I may be paraphrasing a little there, something like that.
Very slightly, Stephan. Clean your ears out, my friend. I've said pretty clearly, wealth is created by labor. Whether that labor be the factory worker or the inventor that produces the machine the worker is on, this has been the case in every society throughout human history. After all, inventors are themselves laborers. But yeah, no, there's just no, there's absolutely no deterministic social or historical force that means that property rights and a respect for violence lead to a prevention of violence leads to the material wealth of our society. Singapore, South Korea under its fascist regime, the Soviet Union back when it was around, China today, Saudi Arabia. These are societies that have enjoyed massive economic and productive booms with, let's say, tenuous relationships to the principles of free markets and human rights.
Okay, that's great. Let's deal with those
I agree. It is great.
Hang on, no, that's a great argument. Now we have something we can discuss. Okay, so South Korea. If you compare and contrast South Korea, which is a relatively free market system, at least compared to North Korea, and you see that South Korea's wealth is 20 to 30 times per capita North Korea's wealth, well, we can see the effects of relative free markets to a communist system. Of course, remember, North Korea, not referred to these days, of course, was founded specifically as a communist system. And so if you look at the difference between South and North Korea, you have here
it works,
a twin
doesn't
study,
it?
a
Works
twin
really good.
study, the most robust form of comparing situations and environments known to mankind, because you have a genetically virtually identical population, you have one system that's relative free market, relative property rights, relative rule of law, relative contract enforcement. You have another system that's communist, and you can see the outcome. With regards to Saudi Arabia is wealthy as an effect of the wealth of the West, because Saudi Arabia stole the oil-producing companies, the oil-producing machinery, and the oil-producing technology from the West. And this is why Saudi Arabia's wealth followed its theft after the Second World War of Western technology, Western companies, and Western expertise. After the West had been tragically weakened by the horrors of the Second World War, a lot of the Arab states jumped in and nationalized and stole basically all of the Western stuff. And so, boy, yeah, but it's like calling a thief wealthy because he's stealing from people. That's not really the same as actually having a free market yourself. And the wealth that Saudi Arabia is able to gather, it gathers because the wealth, the wealth of the West is enough to
both of
purchase
these
stuff
arguments.
that the
That's
Arabs,
what's kind
to
of
a large
frustrating.
degree, not
Like
completely,
Stephan, I feel
stole
like
from
he
the West.
should have.
So
He's
I don't think
close.
that, this really goes
But you
against
can't
the
assume
argument.
that
Which
like wealth is
examples
created by like morality.
Which
Like,
examples
there's more to it
of yours
than
would
that,
you
for
like
sure.
demolished first? Would you prefer North and South Korea or Saudi Arabia?
I feel that that's a bit of a rhetorical question.
It is. I'll do both. So, South Korea had heavily protectionist policies up until the 1980s. The idea that the free market was what led to their sudden economic boom following the Korean War is ludicrous. What's more, they had a fascist government for a large portion of that time, U.S.-backed, installed as an alternative to what happened to North Korea. The circumstances that have befallen North Korea are incredibly complicated, but the idea that the differential between North and South Korea's relative levels of success is that one of them has had free markets and one of them hasn't is ridiculous. There was such an enormous complexity of issues, a historical, social, economic, that divide these two countries and have continued to divide these two countries for the past 70 years, which makes comparisons between the two of them on such a singular, simple basis.
Do you have any actual arguments, or do you just say ridiculous and it's complex? I mean, come on.
Responding to an argument with, is that an argument rhetorically, is not the same as rebutting my argument. I'll ask you, let me finish. That's with the case of North and South Korea. With Saudi Arabia, I don't know what you mean by they stole their wealth. They traded for it in the free market. They were able to
No. They nationalized Western countries. They nationalized Western technology and Western companies and Western capital equipment after the Second World War.
So they were able to, not using the free market, develop a tremendous amount of civilizational
people
wealth
are
that
different.
Currently places
Therefore, it's not analogous. It's not because of capitalism. I swear, guys, said the sweating socialist.
Development level, and they did it not using the free market policies.
Oh my God!
The central basis for all social and material development. So
I don't think morality is like what creates wealth. Because you can have like a totalitarian state and create wealth. So it's definitely not
that. Doesn't mean that he's using free market. It's a moral thing to do. Or
it's more than just morality. Morality is usually like that happens just from general development. So I don't know.
You're the one who's making the claim that wealth is built fundamentally, or at least the huge spike in wealth since the Industrial Revolution has been built by the existence of liberal economics and the free market. And I'm saying that's just ahistorical. It doesn't correlate to the developments of dozens of countries.
No, he's right. It doesn't. It doesn't. But I mean, to some extent, it does, but not 100%.
So when I say that free markets require a respect for property rights, you somehow bring in Saudi Arabia with its massive theft of Western technology and
which got really wealthy. Yes,
you somehow bring that into the free market and its respect for property rights.
No, I said they don't have a free market, and in spite of that, they have grown very civilizationally wealthy. They're a counter-argument to your point.
No, they're not.
Okay,
Wait,
so you
not?
just admitted that they are not, advocates of the free market, so to speak, and yet, if I could Google
morality
right now,
alone is not required. It's not like what
stats,
creates wealth. I mean, it helps. It helps a lot, but it's not. That's not the only thing. There's a lot of stuff
pretty
that
impressive
happens.
position, and I would argue that is, of course,
it's one thing
because of the
stupid.
tireless work of their incredibly exploited worker base, who is, essentially, at the behest of a totalitarian.
It's
theocracy,
that exploited worker. Yeah, makes sense.
I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying that's what.
Man, we got a real fucking brainiac here.
All right. Let's see here. Sorry, just we've gone far afield from my original, which is good. This is a rambling kind of thing, here we go. They depend on oil as the country has the second largest proven petroleum reserves, the largest exporter of petroleum in the world. Did they develop all of that technology and knowledge and expertise themselves, do you think, Vaush, or did they get it from somewhere else?
I don't see how that's in any way relevant to my claim that you don't need free market economics to build a high level of civilization.
He's right. He's right. I'd hate to call the socialist right, but he's right in this situation. Stefan, you can do better than this.
How do you think the cave of? How do you?
Oh my God, you can do better than this, Stefan.
Global civilization.
Oh, you're doing a terrible job. I'd freaking get in there and blast this dude's asshole. Are you kidding?
If you don't invent something yourself, but you're dependent upon the free market to invent it for you, then you kind of are dependent on the free market for the source of your wealth. In other words,
that would only
Saudi
be the
Arabia
case if only the free market could build oil.
And then I'll be quiet. Let me finish my point. So if Saudi Arabia didn't develop all of this oil extraction technology, the petroleum engineering, all of the wonderful machinery and complexity and all of that, if they instead stole it from free market developed economies, then they kind of are dependent on the free market for the source of their wealth.
So let me clarify two things. For one, I addressed this argument earlier, where you cannot simply hand wave the enormous material success of societies that do not have free markets by saying that they just got what they had from other countries. For two, stealing is a valid way for, not moral, mind you, but a valid way for civilizations to accrue wealth. The British Empire did this for like a millennia. Many of the civilizations that we, laud today, yours, maybe, Canada did some stuff, I'm pretty sure. America's certainly. We stole enormous amounts of wealth from all over the world, and that contributed to our civilizational wealth. Again, I'm not making moral claims here, only factual ones. And finally,
also, it doesn't equate to wealth. You're right there, but you're also wrong, you
so to speak,
fuck.
the means of production, albeit for the royal family, is not an argument that they couldn't have developed those facilities themselves. In every case, this is a legitimate example of, without the impetus of the free market, a society managing to develop enormous material wealth. Also, the idea that just because they nationalized a few oil fields 45 years ago, therefore means that all the wealth they've enjoyed since then is exclusively because of the refineries that they only would have been able to steal and couldn't have just built themselves, I think is fairly ridiculous. I don't think it's a good explanatory
is ridiculous.
Variable for why they're so
Also,
wealthy.
you're ridiculous.
So if I might just ask like a question here, again, I want to be mostly out of this, but
both of these arguments are
a better way to
stupid.
phrase it would be whether or not a free market is better.
Oh my god.
At this kind of innovation. Vaush, do you think
both of the arguments are stupid?
Oh, okay.
Sorry, just before we put a bookmark on that, because I do
Stupidity.
want to get back to this communist argument that we all know this one. Like, there's a fixed pie in the world, and if one country ends up with more slices of pie, it's because it stole slices of pie from other countries. And of course there is theft, and I am a voluntarist. I'm an anarchist. I despise and dislike the existence of the state in any way, shape, or form as a predatory mechanism which violates property and personhood on a regular basis, both domestically and overseas, in horrifying, complex, and multi-millennial manners.
That's what he was saying.
But come on, the wealth of the West was not primarily stolen. And we know this because the wealth in the West is far more than the entire GDP. What on earth is that background noise? The wealth of the West is far greater than the entire GDP of the world 200 years ago. So there's no conceivable way that the West could have stolen all of that wealth. And of course, the reality is that as far as roaming bands of gangs stealing things from each other, that's been a constant for 150,000 years of human history. So the idea, again, we go back to this thing at the beginning where human income was flat, human wealth was flat for almost all of human history, and then you get this incredible spike over the last 200 years. That's not the result of people just being better at stealing. That is the result of the free market, because theft has been a constant factor in human society throughout all of human history.
Okay, so for one,
noise, just by the way, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's kind of distracting.
Oh, I apologize. I was typing down a few of the points to make sure I didn't forget.
Sure.
I'm taking your advice.
Thank you.
I'm a millennial. I can't write with my hand. Okay, so there are a couple things here. I have no idea what communism has to do with believing there's one pie and different civilizations have different slices of the pie. It's pretty well known economically and politically that it is not a zero-sum game, that different parties can benefit. I don't know why you're arguing as though I said that stealing is an explanatory factor for civilizational wealth. I'm only saying it is a way that civilizations have built upon their wealth. And your idea that the great civilizations of the West today didn't build a tremendous amount of their wealth off of theft is frankly ridiculous. Colonialism fueled the American, the English, the French, the Dutch, the Portuguese, and the Spanish empires for an incredibly long length of time. I mean, if we could go over, I don't have these stats in front of me right now, but if we could go over them, they are the amount of wealth that they were able to pull in, raw materials, labor exploitation from their colonies was unbelievable. And critiquing colonialism is by no means a communist exclusive venture. But yeah, no, just stealing is a thing civilizations do. Again, it's a counter argument to your point that the free market and the magic of individual success is the explanatory factor for the huge increase in civilizational wealth. Also, I can't help but notice, it seems like every time we I get you on something, you jump to a different topic. Like before we were on like Saudi Arabia, North and South Korea, and now you jump to the idea that like communists are saying the wealth only got their money from stealing, which I never said. So
No,
just,
hang on,
very
no,
spurious.
this is not me jumping around, brother. Come on, don't be ridiculous. It's not me jumping around at all. You brought up this argument that the West, in part, gained its wealth through colonialism, and I'm just pushing back. This is not true. So
That is a factually
colonialism, like most government programs, it was a government program. Colonialism was brutal on the working classes of Europe. I mean, you probably know these stories as well as I do, that there used to be these... my brother actually had one of these when we were kids. It was a stein with a glass bottom. And you say, well, why on earth would you want a beer stein with a glass bottom? Well, the reason being, of course, that the British government was so hungry for sailors to go around preying on the planet and attacking other countries that they would drop a coin into a guy's beer at the bar, and if he took a drink from it, he was considered to have accepted the king's coin, and he could then be kidnapped, impressed, they called it, and sold, well, not sold, but kidnapped and put into the Navy against his will for an indefinite period of time. Of course, the same thing occurred with just about every empire, from the Roman Empire backwards and forwards. So colonialism was a map-coloring exercise for the ruling classes. It did not make the countries wealthier at all. It benefited certain particular individuals who were very high up. It's like the Federal Reserve of its time, you know, like this money printing machine of monstrosity benefits a few people at the top at the expense of the working class. But the idea that the society as a whole became wealthier during colonial times is, well, you can see particular people became richer, those who got the kind of anti-free trade monopolies and charters from the government. Yeah, they got kind of rich, and that was a violation of free trade and property and all of that. But the average person, taxpayers lost money on colonialism. The taxes would have been far lower without colonialism, and they lost their lives, their freedoms, their futures, everything with colonialism. It was a monstrous behavior on the part of the state. And so the idea that this suddenly generated a massive amount of wealth, and the argument against that, of course, is that if colonialism was so profitable, then why on earth did all the European powers, after they had exhausted themselves to near decrepitude after the First and Second World War, why was the first thing they did was give up all their colonies? I mean, if it's so wonderfully productive and profitable to have colonies, why didn't they just use that to replenish their coffers? It's because they lost money on those things in aggregate.
So I would expect somebody who wrote a book called The Art of the Argument to understand what an unsound argument is. So first of all, that colonialism was hard on European people has literally nothing to do with any point that I was making. I'm sure colonialism was difficult for European people in a number of ways. It went on for centuries. I'm sure it introduced a lot of strange economic pressures that were quite hard on the peasantry of, you know, the countries that were doing the colonializing. Second of all, it was by no means just a state's endeavor. Most colonialism took place under a system called mercantile capitalism, which means trade firms would work alongside the crown to colonial.
That's capitalism.
This is where we get stuff
when
like
they have merit by the state, guys, it's capitalism. Awesome.
So this wasn't a state
False
project.
dichotomy. 101.
Pre-capitalism corporations working alongside state mandates towards a specific collective economic end.
So it was run by the state, but it wasn't a government program. Okay.
No, it wasn't run by the state. The state. Whoa. My friend, your ears. Get the eggs out of them. I said that they worked alongside the state, not that it was a state project.
Nobody works alongside the state. Come on. I mean, the state is the monopoly of force. It's the one with all the guns and cannons and bullets. I mean, nobody works alongside the state.
If you would like to go over, no, it's okay. I can't do a full history lesson right now. But if you want to go over it, you can find that there were actually very wealthy people who, of their own independent volition, chose to start firms to work alongside the crown without any guns being pressed to their head. It's called mercantile capitalism. It's not just a state project. This is highly ahistorical. What's more, your argument that colonialism didn't benefit society at large, it just benefited the wealthy, that's the case for all societies. Every civilization that has ever existed, with the possible exception of some incredibly small anarchist communes, has had a wildly disproportionate amount of wealth and material productivity directed towards the ruling class of that society. That was the case in Rome, that was the case in Greece, that was the case in medieval Europe, and that is the case in large part today. The fact that it disproportionately benefits the wealthy doesn't mean it doesn't also benefit society. Again, England, Portugal,
Wait, are you
Spain,
saying that
these
the
countries...
guy who the guy who was
Why are you so
involuntarily
allergic to letting
kidnapped
me
and
finish
thrown
the
on a
point?
ship and then not given any oranges or lemons, who developed scurvy, had his teeth
This
fall
is
out, his
not
eyesight
related.
go, and then
I
got
just
blinded before he
acknowledged
even got a
that
chance to go into
individual
combat, was
peasants-
somehow benefiting from colonialism?
No, that isn't an argument that I made. My friend, the eggs. You have to listen, okay?
My
I'm not
friend, the
saying that
eggs.
every
It's the eggs,
individual
guys.
peasant benefited from colonialism.
Jesus.
I am saying the civilization at
I
large.
love how he
This is
talks down
factually
to this
correct.
guy.
If you take a look at all of the spices, material, wealth, and labor that these colonizers were able to extract from the colonized civilizations.
Why wouldn't they?
built-
Why
Whoa,
wouldn't they
whoa,
be
whoa,
able
whoa,
to trade for
please,
them?
my friend, you made 4 points. I give you 4 points back. So this idea that it's disproportionate in how it's distributed, irrelevant to the broader argument. And last but not least, the idea that, like, well, if colonialism was so profitable, why didn't they just keep doing it? There are a number of historical and social arguments as to why individual colonies, most of them fought or revolted against their colonial oppressors. Nowadays, we have an international environment that discourages colonialism, thank goodness. But in large part, the reason why England didn't just, stay in charge of India is because they were growing so feisty that it wouldn't have been worth the effort. So there you go. Colonialism was beneficial to the civilizations that colonized. In general, that's why they did it after all. It was hard on the individual peasants of that civilization, but that's the case for everything that has ever taken place in these civilizations. That it was disproportionately beneficial to the wealthy is irrelevant, and the fact that it ended is an argument against its efficacy during the time when it was functioning.
So real quick,
Oh my God. You're taking the
Stephan-
side of the ruling class to own the free market guy. I guess.
By
listen, I guess
saying
I'm gonna be the one.
colonialism was
hang on. You
effective?
had your say.
Are you
man. You
that
had your say.
weak
Back
for
the
a
fuck off
gotcha?
the mic.
Come on,
you had
guys.
your say. All right.
Real quick, Stefan.
I guess I'm going to have to be the one who
Stefan?
stands up for the working class here, because the fact that a couple of people really well connected to the guys with all the guns, the state, the fact that the oligarchs in the mercantilist, capitalist model,
There you
the
go.
fact that they were able to bribe the state to socialize the costs of their monopoly enforcement of the extraction of resources from foreign countries, which is what mercantilism is. The fact that they were able to socialize the cost of that by having the government steal people's lives, steal people's labor, and enforce people into the Navy and into the Army and so on. The fact that they were able to do that is not beneficial to society as a whole. There is no such thing, of course, as society as a whole. I mean, this is just a concept, right? So the fact that the vast majority of people in the colonial powers paid more taxes, was subject to more arbitrary kidnappings and being forced to be the army and navy slaves of the mercantilist powers that be, the idea that this is somehow beneficial to society as a whole is monstrous. The fact that oligarchs can use the power of the state to enslave the working classes is not beneficial to society as a whole. I got to tell you, I was a little surprised hearing this defense of oligarchical, mercantilist violence.
I want to clarify
It's
this
kind of
really
surprising.
quickly. So I've said this several times. I'm not making any moral statements, only factual statements. And the argument is what builds civilizational wealth, over which colonialism objectively did. That's why they did it.
All right.
So this weird, like, virtue
BRB.
simile, like 2-minute rant about how I speak over the poor, plighted European commoner. I'm not saying any of this was moral. It's colonialism. Do you think I'm defending colonialism? What are you listening to this discussion? No, I'm saying it contributed to the accumulation of material wealth. This is what Marx would have called, by the way, primitive accumulation. You can Google that next time you'd like to come more prepared to a discussion of this caliber. But yeah, in the future, please listen to my arguments before responding to them. Mod, you've been interrupted so many times. I apologize for the indignities that have been forced upon you. What would you like to move to next?
No, so I do want you guys each to have. Thank you for that. I do want you guys to have a final word on this before we move on. We got 40 more minutes, and I do want to get in exploitation. So if you guys could just put in, like, closing thoughts before we move on. Stefan, if you want to go ahead.
Do you mean closing thoughts on the past discussion, or
on human wealth?
Oh yeah, so yeah, human wealth can be transferred at the point of a gun, for sure. I mean, I was talking about this. I'm doing a series for my subscribers, which is the Communist Manifesto for Children. She and I are going through the Communist Manifesto and talking about this. And without a doubt, the farmer who grows the crops, warlords can ride over the hill and can grab his stuff and hit him with the hilt of their sword and steal his bread and his food and his beer and maybe his wife and all that. For sure, but that does not generate wealth. What that does is it encourages everyone to exist at a bare subsistence level, because all the excess that you have to put a huge amount of work into creating and holding on to, all of that excess can be snatched away from you at any time. Now, this, of course, occurs in more primitive societies or more warlord-based societies with just, some guy coming over the hill and hitting you on the head and taking your stuff. So the transfer of wealth, so to speak, does not add, like the forced transfer of wealth does not add to the wealth of society, but this is why societies remain so poor, is there was no point. If you could not hold on to your property, if you could not have property rights enforced, if you could not have contracts enforced, if you could not have future reliability for maintaining your control over the excess goods that you produce, just don't produce any excess goods. It just doesn't work. I mean, this is why communist economies and socialist economies are so unproductive, because your stuff just gets taken fairly arbitrarily by the state or by the local whoever, right? And so you have to have property rights in order to put in the labor to have some, at least reasonable confidence that you can hold on to the excess value that you have produced, whatever it is. And so this argument that somehow using force to transfer wealth adds to the wealth of society. Oh, yeah. I mean, the guy who knocks you over the head and takes your bread, he's got a loaf of bread, and he didn't have to even grow the food, or he didn't have to grow the crops. He didn't have to cook it. He didn't have to do anything, didn't have to store it. And so, yeah, there has been a transfer of wealth, but that is a net reduction, because not only has no wealth been created when you transfer a loaf of bread from a farmer to a warlord, but the effort that the warlord has put into pursuing and getting that bread is not something that is being used to produce any other good and service, and so you have a net reduction. Plus, in the long term, what happens is people, as I said, don't want to produce any excess goods unless they have some reasonable assurance that they can hold on to them. So the idea that the initiation of force and theft and so on adds to the wealth in society, either at an individual level or at some large mercantilist, colonialist level, is just false. It's just false. So that's my last thought. I guess we can turn this over to Vaush.
Yeah, go ahead, Vaush.
Yeah, I'm a market socialist. I actually defend the efficacy of not necessarily free markets, but at the very least of market economies. And the reason why I'm a market socialist is because I recognize that the driving force of history from a material perspective is and always has been the tireless efforts of the nameless millions and billions of human beings who have lived and died on the fields or in the factories. These are the people who bring us forward, and to them we should always be grateful. We are them, after all. I am working right now, and so is Stephan, of course, albeit our jobs are different than most folks, but this is nonetheless labor. Labor builds, labor produces, labor provides. And while I do agree, and I want to be clear about this, in the interest of fairness, that there are elements of liberal capitalism that have facilitated an increase in our general level of economic efficiency. Even Marx contended this, that capitalism was superior materially and morally even to feudalism. I do not believe that is in and of itself a great enough explanatory variable to account for the entirety of human history. So yeah, in conclusion, I suppose, while it is undeniable that market economies and property rights have facilitated the development of further economic efficiencies, even those exist only through the tireless labor of the worker, as it has been since the beginning of time. And it is for that reason that I credit them. And I am proud to say that every economic and political position that I advocate for and support, all of them are derived from the advocacy for this group of people, who I believe we owe everything to.
Can I just mention one thing here? I know we've got this whole exploitation thing. I think it's been somewhat embedded into what it is that we have been talking about. And I'll put a request in. Of course, we can obviously negotiate all of this, though I will be using Brad Pitt's agent to negotiate this next part. But so I think the exploitation part has largely been dealt with, although we can certainly do it again or in a different direction. But I am curious about what I've seen from Vaush about this idea that I think it's companies with over 500 employees should have the government take the companies and distribute the ownership of the company to the employees and so on. Like the ideal economic situation, to me, is very simple, like non-aggression, non-initiation of the use of force, respect for property rights, and everything else is fine. But I would like to know more about this approach to dealing with larger companies in Vaush's perspective?
Sorry with you. I think that so a lot of users here aren't familiar with you guys' views. I think it would be good if we started with just how you both guys view exploitation, and we can jump right into that.
I would be happy to lead from exploitation into that because the two
Of course
concepts
you
are
would,
pretty
because you're a
inextricably
fucking socialist.
Yeah.
Do you want to go ahead?
A cringy,
Yeah,
cringy
sure. So
socialist.
exploitation can mean a million different things. God, I mean, you can
Ideas.
exploit your friends for for pizza and free car rides. But in a broad, civilizational sense, in a broader social sense, I think exploitation exists anytime there is a power differential between one agent and another, and the more powerful agent uses that differential to extract favorable circumstances, conditions, or interactions from that person. The most obvious example of this would, of course, be the exploitation of the common worker, because a worker has much less bargaining power than a firm does, or a boss, or a business owner, or whatever. A worker, while they can nominally negotiate for their wages, most of the time just has to accept what companies are providing, whereas companies have all of the bargaining power because they don't have the same level of individual vulnerability that a regular, average, everyday middle class or poor person has. I would consider that to be a very severe form of exploitation. There's also a tremendous amount of labor theft that goes on in this country, more in fact than every other type of theft combined, including burglaries, robberies. This is stuff like unpaid overtime. These are very serious and very pernicious elements of overt and illegal exploitation that we have sort of normalized in our society through our deferential, almost cuck-like reverence of the
Why does he keep using
autocratic
that word?
business owner.
That's really cringy.
Vaush, have you been a business owner?
Unless you would consider what I am presently doing owning a business, because I pay a few folks, no, not really.
So you do have employees, right?
I mean, not in a legal sense, because I just pay them for like editing work, for example. They would be more contractors. But apart from that, no. The real rigors of business owning, I am not familiar with, personally.
Yeah,
and do you feel like you have massive power and control over the people who are contractors for you?
Some of them, yes. I make a surprising amount of money from doing what I do. I know some of the people who work for me, who edit for me, aren't in positions of privilege as I am, and I know that the terms in which I negotiate how much I pay somebody to edit my videos are ones over which I have complete control. I can say $50 to edit a video that's 2 hours. I can say $500, but that's me to say. I'm in a much stronger position to bargain than they are.
And why is that, do you think?
Well, because I have much more money, power, and they're the ones coming to me to fulfill a subsistence need of theirs, which is wealth.
And do you believe that that power, while it may not corrupt you because you have an admirable knowledge of these power relations, do you believe that many people are corrupted by that power? Do you think that's kind of innate to the mechanics of the system?
Yes, I think it's innate to the mechanics of the system. I don't know if it reflects necessarily on the moral character of the people who do the exploitation. I think it's a necessary component of a capitalist economy.
Okay, so a difference in power tends to corrupt the person who has the most power, right?
I believe so, generally speaking, yeah.
And that's why we can't have a state.
I mean, I'm an anarchist, so...
Good, okay, so we agree on that, because I thought I'd heard you make the argument that the government should seize the means of production from large companies and distribute them to the owners, to the workers. So I thought that you required a state for that. Maybe I had misheard that argument, but yeah,
that,
so
might
for
be
sure,
the
wherever one
period.
person has more authority and more power, there can be corruption that occurs. But of course, there is no possibility of a greater power differential than that between the state and the citizen. The state and the citizen is the greatest power differential that there is, and the monopoly on the use of force that characterizes the state. This is not for you. This is just for the audience as a whole. Who may not be
Sure,
sort of
because I
familiar with these
completely agree.
arguments.
Go off, King. I completely agree. I'm very anti-state, though I believe there are transitory systems between ours and a stateless society that should be implemented. But I'm, in principle, agreeing with everything you say.
Okay, so you have power with regards to how much you pay people, but to some degree you are, of course, also at the mercy whether they do a good job, whether they're reliable, whether they do it on time, or whether they end up trying to charge you more and withhold your materials and so on. I have gone from, growing up dirt poor to I co-founded a software company, grew it to 30 or 40 people, and most of them worked for me because it was a software company and I was the chief technology officer. and you certainly do have some authority. And it's funny because I remember being very sensitive to this, having been an employee myself for so many years. It's a funny thing. I'll just tell you this by the by. I was very aware that when I asked an employee to come into my office, that the employee would be nervous. And I actually remember sitting there brainstorming with a friend of mine, how can I invite an employee into my office so that the employee doesn't feel nervous that they're in trouble or they're fired or something like that. And I actually just came up with, just for those who ever want to use it, this was the residual product of my brainstorming. My answer was,
Well,
the
I
solution
am
was,
going to stop
hey,
streaming
so-and-so,
right
can
now,
I just
so
borrow you
that
for a
way I can
second? And
listen to
that gave them
this.
some sense of ease. I don't know why, but it kind of worked that way. But I was,
talk
of
to y'all
course,
later.
also very much at the mercy